If everyone could find their seats, we could get started, please. That's not mine. They just pop up randomly, you know?
That's good. Somebody's got good taste.
I had a late move out in October. We did around our house and started preparing out for women's home. Second story, and that was the concern. I was going to eat one of my wife's dachshunds. I asked for more of the dachshund. Shit's behind my bar all the time. It goes under the swinging door.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go ahead and call to order the meeting of the Nevada Board of Wildlife Commissioners for Saturday, November 3rd, 2018. Commissioner Hubbs, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Go ahead and get a roll call of the commission, please. Is that, I don't know who's doing it.
I will.
Okay.
Chairman Johnston,
I'm here.
Vice Chairman Valentine,
Here.
Commissioner Almberg,
Here.
Commissioner Barnes,
Here.
Commissioner Caviglia,
Here.
Commissioner East, Commissioner Hubbs, Commissioner Keel, Commissioner McNinch.
Here.
And would the county advisory boards please stand and announce their presence?
Paul Dixon Clark, Florida Lincoln, Tom Casanova, Northside Douglas, Robinson Washoe, Marcus Beckman, Gene Green, Joe Green, Pershing, Lynn Butch, and Wolf.
Thank you all. Move on to agenda item number 12, approval of the agenda. Chairman Johnston, for possible action, the commission will review the agenda, may take action to approve the agenda. The commission may remove items from the agenda, continue items for consideration, or take items out of order. Any comments or questions on the agenda? Seeing none, this is an action item. Any public comment in Las Vegas on the agenda?
No public comment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any public comment in Reno on the agenda? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Valentine with a second by Commissioner McNinch to approve the agenda as presented. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 9-0. Move on to the next agenda item, member items, announcements, and correspondence. Chairman Johnston and Secretary Wasley, informational. Commissioners may present emergent items. No action may be taken by the commission. Any item requiring commission action may be scheduled on a future commission agenda. The commission will review and may discuss correspondence sent or received by the commission since the last regular meeting and may provide copies for the exhibit file. Commissioners may provide hard copies of their correspondence for the written record. Correspondence sent or received by Secretary Wasley may also be discussed. Any member items? Commissioner McNinch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a couple quick things. The public comment that we received at the end of our meeting yesterday, I don't know, that's been, I knew it bothered me then. It bothered me all night to hear what John Lesbrunz has gone through. And, you know, it's one of those things I'm not sure. It certainly isn't anything that any of us represent. We certainly don't condone it. And it bothered me all night from the standpoint that I think that we've all been kind of put on an island or chastised a little bit, but none of us have probably ever gone through anything like he's experiencing right now. And I can't imagine being in his shoes. And I sure hope that we've got a legislative session coming up, and aside from any legal opportunities that he might have between now and then, I think it's worth a conversation to talk about how we might be able to affect change at the legislature, or put some laws in place that would kind of address some of those issues, strengthen something. I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of thinking out loud, and I'm just planting a seed that I think it'd be worth our time to have that conversation. It's just this harassment and these threatening behaviors. It's one thing to have an opinion and to be passionate about it. It's another to threaten people and intimidate them to a point where they're fearful for their safety and their family's safety. So I plant that seed a little bit. On another note, I just wanted to share that I was up in northern Nevada last weekend, up in Tom's country. I was just trying to get away from society for a couple of days and decided to go out and do a little bird watching. And I made, one of the game wardens made contact with me out in the field. And afterwards, I started to process, what they must have been thinking when they came up on me coming off of this. Tom was explaining, yeah, you were on the wrong road. And I'm glad to know that, because it was one of those silty roads that has like the 6-inch super fine silty stuff that goes poof when you drive through it. I had about an inch or two of that silt on top of my truck, and the windows were so caked with it, I had to open my door because I didn't want to roll my window down. And here I open the door, and she starts asking me questions. What are you out doing? And I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be awkward. And I said, well, believe it or not, I was out bird watching right in the middle of all those hunters out there. Yeah, and anyway, I wanted to compliment her, and I didn't write her name down. I think her name was Melinda Cohen, and she was very cordial and very polite, and processing the information that she was getting from me was probably very unique and very different. And anyway, I just wanted to compliment her for her professionalism, and she was very patient with the information she was getting, just because I'm sure she hasn't heard a lot of that up there in that country before. So I was in a place where, she had every reason to believe that I was up to something. So anyway, my compliments to her. She did a nice job.
Any other member announcements? Commissioner Hubbs?
Similar to Commissioner McNinch, what came to mind after the meeting last night was some correspondence I did receive early on, and I kind of forgot about it. But obviously, when some of the issues concerning the bear came up, I did forward some information to Director Wasley about some imagery that was sent out online. There was a problem bear, I believe, and the bear was trapped or in some capacity, and there were some photographs of that event. And I don't know, there was a gentleman in the picture kind of smiling and laughing, and the bear was obviously incapacitated and in this trapped, however they trapped them in this kind of dome-looking structure. And I think it's really easy to draw a lot of negative conclusions from imagery like that, especially in light of the disconnect and the way that we're so divided on these issues. So that was floating around online. There were individuals who were really upset about that and about how they were interpreting it, which obviously after hearing back from Director Wasley, what happened wasn't anything near to what the interpretation was to the public. So I think it's really important when that starts to circle around, especially on things like social media, that we address them pretty quickly and put out what's actually happened. And I'm sure the department may have done that or not, but it would be nice to direct these folks back to the correct source so they can understand what happened.
Secretary Wasley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess the particular instance that Commissioner Hubbs is referencing was a bear that was immobilized in a culvert trap. An individual, a volunteer at the time, had climbed into the culvert trap for a photograph. He did have a smile on his face. I think the important part of this is that that photograph was, I believe, over 3 years old, and due to policy changes in the department, we no longer allow promote those kinds of opportunities for the exact reasons. As far as the department expending resources to try to tell the accurate story and the correct story, unfortunately, our history and experience with that, there are individuals who are not interested in the truth. It simply doesn't matter. The fact that, we have responsibilities to manage those animals, we have responsibilities in the realm of public safety. None of the management responsibilities or public safety responsibilities justify, those particular photo ops. There are educational and outreach benefits to exposing, whether it be school kids or members of the public or homeowners, to those animals. It fosters a sense of stewardship. It elevates that stewardship. If they connect to those animals, they're more inclined to take on actions, we believe, take on actions that are consistent with those animals' best interest in mind, whether it be managing their trash. And so historically, we viewed these as opportunities for connection, and we still foster those opportunities for connection that we think elevate a sense of stewardship for those animals. Unfortunately, social media arena is replete with examples of mischaracterization, misinformation, and it's specific to a particular agenda, and that agenda is not consistent with our charge in public safety and sound wildlife management, best management practices. So I guess I would push back a little bit on the notion of the department spending much in the way of resources to combat the misinformation when I guess my experience has shown that is a tactic and a strategy. Some of the individuals putting that out are knowing that they're putting misinformation out. They're mining the data for trends or patterns that promote and validate their perspectives in a way that I think any of our resources expended to combat that could be counterproductive and actually validate their tactics and give them the kind of fight that they're looking for.
Right, so it kind of goes back to this whole idea that there's going to be this social media that has a component of the fake news or whatever, fake manner in which to spread and disseminate information. So I guess from our perspective, though, is it good to report it at least to the platform and say that this is not true, or that it's, I don't even know what the policies are for that anymore, but I know at least some of the companies are starting to take it more seriously.
There we go. It's a good question. At what point do you determine that it's in the best interest of the wildlife or the state to weigh into some of those discussions? And looking at the social media arena, you look at the number of followers or likes, on these various sites, and if you have, 1,300 people with the same dozen people that weigh in and perpetuate, validate one another's perspectives, is it in our best interest to spend time and energy on those, or is it better to use our own outreach tools to help highlight our activities, our actions? There's a disagreement even within the agency. There are some individuals that are subject to some of those attacks that feel just like you do, that we should be spending time and energy defending those attacks. But I firmly believe that weighing into a discussion with a small number of what I believe are extreme views on one end of that continuum is counterproductive, and I don't think it's in the best interest of the expenditure of sportsmen's resources to take on that fight, when I think what it does is it validates the cause and invites a broader audience, and it encourages more banter, unproductive banter.
So anyways, I just brought it up because obviously it came to mind to somewhat understand why individuals might be driven to take such extreme measures if they're seeing imagery like that or things like that, and not knowing how to process that information correctly.
Any other member announcements? I just have a couple. I did have a telephone call with Rachel Bazzetti last night on my way home, although it gets interrupted due to my in and out of cell service. But I communicated to her that the sellable list regulation will be set for another workshop in January. And it's pretty clear to me that one of the biggest issues for the Outfitters and Guides Association is the change that occurred with just the sheer number of people who decided to opt out of having their information available. And that was just made a much easier under the new platform, and that resulted in a much smaller sellable list than what had been generated in the past. And that seems to be one of the key issues for them. I would just add in on the social media, I would encourage everybody to watch the two-part Frontline show on the Facebook Dilemma. That's what it was entitled. It will explain a lot to you on how it works, the algorithms that underlie it, and why it seems to drive divisiveness on the platform because of just how it operates. It was very informative to me. I think also people need to be aware of the concept of confirmation bias, which is that when you see something that confirms your bias, you will tend to accept it, and any evidence that goes against your bias, you will reject. This, I think, goes into what Director Wasley was talking about. It's a well-known psychological phenomenon that you see and I deal with a lot in my line of work. It just exists out there. So I don't know if there's much that we could do as a commission on that. And I don't know if there's an appetite on the part of the commissioners to develop some sort of policy or guidelines with respect to social media to help guide the department in its efforts in that regard. It's one of the things I think we're supposed to do. I don't know what form that might take, but if that is something this commission's interested in, help guiding the department on what it does in terms of the dissemination of information and imagery and reaching out to the public, we could take a look at it. But I would say, and I've said it in other meetings, there's going to be people on the extremes of issues on both sides that they're going to have their views, they're going to express their views, and that's the way it's going to be. And that's the world we live in. So any other member on items or announcements? Anything further, Secretary Wasley? With that, we'll close that agenda item and move on to agenda item number 14, County Advisory Boards to Manage Wildlife. Member items, informational. CAB members may present emergent items. No action may be taken by the commission. Any item requiring commission action will be scheduled on a future commission agenda. Any CAB items?
Good morning, Steve Robinson, Washoe Cab. I did receive considerable correspondence and phone discussions from members of Washoe County concerning Secretary Zinke's secretarial order to allow states to manage all the wildlife within the jurisdiction of the state. This includes wildlife refuges such as the Sheldon. Washoe Cab did ask this last year to allow the state to allow predator hunting and lion hunting within the Sheldon Refuge. And hopefully, in allowance with this secretarial order, that we can have the commission and the department to look at implementing this secretarial order. As I believe time is of the essence, I think it's 180 days to review and implement this order to allow all management of all wildlife in the state. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any other CAB items? Seeing none, we'll bring it back and move on to agenda item number 15, and in particular 15A, Wildlife Trust Fund Semi-Annual Report, Deputy Director Liz O'Brien. A report will be provided on the investment and expenditure of the money in the Wildlife Trust Fund for the period of July 1st, 2017 to June 30th of 2018 pursuant to NRS 501.3585. Ms. O'Brien?
Thank you, Chairman Johnston and members of the commission. I believe you have the report of the status on the Wildlife Trust Fund in your packets. We are required to submit semi-annually to the commission a report to the money in the Wildlife Trust Fund pursuant to NRS 501.3585. In addition to reporting to the commission, we report to the Interim Finance Committee of the Legislature. That meeting is scheduled for December 11th, 2018. This report is for the period of July 1, 2017 through June 30, 2018, so this is the annual report. The department received $649,703.72 in donations and expended $528,585.16. Attached to the report is a detail of every gift that we have received during that time period. Donations are received from a variety of conservation organizations, industry, and private citizens in support of the department. These donations save state funds, mostly sportsman revenue, and in many instances can be used as match for federal dollars at a rate of up to $3 for every $1 donated. That is all I have. Do you have any questions?
Any questions from the commission? Seeing none, thank you very much. Move on to 15B, Department Activity Report. Secretary Wosley, a report will be provided on Nevada Department of Wildlife Activities. Secretary Wosley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As usual, I'll provide an update from each of the 7 divisions within the department, as well as the director's office. Starting with the director's office, I have three items of interest. The first is that Commission General Regulation 479, the rosy boa reptile, was approved by the Legislative Commission and was effective on October 25th. The regulation revises the scientific name of the rosy boa snake. The name change was needed due to the scientific studies that have split the species into 2 distinct entities, one that occurs in Nevada and one that occurs outside of Nevada. Also, Commission General Regulation 478, the Bighorn Sheep, Ewe, and Mountain Goat online course and questionnaire was also approved by the Leg Commission and was effective also on October 25th. The regulation requiring all Bighorn, Ewe, and Mountain Goat tag holders to complete an online course. The regulation eliminates the need for physical inspection for hunters that harvest a ewe. It also requires the tag holder for ram, bighorn sheep, mountain goat, and mountain lion or bear to provide questionnaire information during the already required post-harvest physical inspection, and eliminates the subsequent need for successful tag holders to also submit a questionnaire. Last item from the director's office, the department hired Eide Bailey LLC to conduct an independent audit of our 2018 big game draw process. The audit has wrapped up and we're waiting for the final report. The preliminary report contains no findings. From the game division, the department has taken delivery of a second Bell 407 HP helicopter, which will be known as Wildlife 2. The department purchased the first Bell 407 2 years ago and has been using it for surveys, guzzler work, and water provisioning, among many other uses. The newer Bell 407 replaces the older Bell 206 B3 ships that the department operated for decades. The new ships are more powerful and versatile and provide our staff with greater safety during operation. Game division staff compiled and distributed a summary of age data from mule deer teeth collected during 2014 through 2016 seasons. This data will identify trends in local harvest statistics and age structure of the herds throughout the state and will be used in population modeling. Overall, the statewide average age of bucks harvested was 3.5 years old from a sample of about 600 teeth collected. Some of the more conservatively managed hunt units, such as Unit 194 through 196, here on the Carson Front, 081 in the northeast corner of the state, and 241 through 245 had an average age of 4.5 years, and generally averaged greater antler spread and main beam lengths. The oldest deer recorded was a 15-year-old buck that was harvested in Unit 231 in 2014. Average number of points from harvested deer was a 3-point, and average outside spread was about 21 inches statewide. Chronic wasting disease sampling is ongoing. CWD is a neurological and fatal disease of the deer family. The disease, although similar to the bovine form known as mad cow disease, has never been linked with any human illness. CWD has been detected in 25 states and resulted in population declines in some areas, yet it has never been detected in Nevada. Our objective is to obtain at least 300 samples annually so that we can determine the statistical probability of its detection, and we're approaching 250 samples already this year. The department has been using hunter check stations, taxidermists, and meat processors to obtain the necessary samples, but all submissions have been voluntary. We're also trying to approach that strategically with the idea that we know it hasn't been detected to the west of us or the north of us, and the likely corridor of movement into the state would be from the east, so we're targeting a lot of those sample collections along the Utah border. The department has been notified by the Department of Interior that migration studies of mule deer and pronghorn in northern Nevada have been funded by the federal government to further Secretarial Order 3362, improving habitat quality in western big game winter range and migration corridors. Analysis of mule deer movements and marking and monitoring pronghorn will provide the department and the Department of Interior with sound biological information to assist in prioritizing protection and enhancement of important corridors for wildlife migrations. The funding amount will approach $300,000. No fewer than 12 moose observations have been reported in September within northeastern Nevada. A single moose has been unlawfully harvested during an elk hunt during each of the 3 of the last 4 years, 3 cows and 1 bull. Additional animals may have been taken and possibly not reported. The moose population in Nevada appears to be growing. The Fisheries Division, with cooler fall temperatures, concerns about toxic algae developing in northern Nevada waters has largely gone away. Because of greatly improved conditions, the Nevada Division of Environmental Protection lifted restrictions at Chimney Reservoir in Humboldt County in mid-October. Fisheries staff are working with NDEP and the Bureau of Public Health to develop a plan to better address these problems, which will continue to occur next summer and in future years. Last round of monitoring found no evidence of quagga or zebra mussel DNA at Ruby Marsh or Wild Horse in South Fork reservoirs. This is the 3rd year when we've seen DNA show up in early lab results, then disappear by fall. Fisheries staff is working with the analysis labs to try to determine the cause of the false positive detections. Small number of northern pike continue to be found in Cummins Lake, still all of a similar size, now 10 to 12 inches. A new technique has been identified that will determine if those fish were spawned in Cummins or if they came from another water source using stable isotope analysis. Staff will be working on that this fall and confirm if this was an illegal introduction or fish that survived the eradication efforts. However, despite the presence of a small number of pike, both largemouth bass and rainbow trout in Cummins are doing very well and showing good reproduction and growth rates. This indicates that the pike there are not having an impact as of yet. Surveys of Eagle Valley Reservoir in late September found abundant largemouth bass up to 5 pounds and good growth rates on stocked rainbow trout. The treatments this spring to reduce nuisance aquatic vegetation were successful, reducing milfoil growth by at least 40%, and staff are working with the Division of State Parks to do additional treatments next year. Fall surveys of Devil's Hole pupfish counted 187 adult fish in Devil's Hole. This is the highest fall count in the last 10 years. Exact reasons are unclear, but the population is cyclical, and changed algae conditions may be favoring better larval survival. From the Law Enforcement Division, there have been 2 cases in recent weeks in which mine workers were bitten by coyotes at Bald Mountain Mine south of Elko. Wildlife Services was called to remove the aggressive coyotes. It's believed that mine workers were feeding the coyotes, which often ends up leading to aggressive behavior and is a recipe for disaster for the coyotes. 2 game wardens assisted the U.S. Forest Service and many local agencies with an extremely large illegal public land marijuana grow in Nye County. Several arrests were made. Eastern Region game wardens are investigating the killing of 2 deer in Unit 081 on Idaho tags. Suspect interviews were concluded October 26th in Idaho. This case also sparked a case for Idaho fishing game when our wardens uncovered the fact that someone was hunting with the tag of an Idaho man who'd been deceased for several weeks. Several news outlets covered the sentencing of Kenneth Hines of Sparks for various big game poaching charges that arose from an investigation into poaching incidents from prior years. Hines will pay over $5,000 in fines and will lose his license privileges for 5 years. Daniel Hertzer of Winnemucca was recently convicted in Ely Justice Court of obstructing, hindering, or interfering with a game warden for his role in a fishing contact at Cold Creek Reservoir near Ely. The charge carries 12 demerits for license revocation and stemmed from a fisherman contact in which the father of an unlicensed fisherman hid some fish and impeded the game warden in his investigation of the case. A Fernley man reported himself of accidentally shooting a cow moose, earlier referenced, with a cow elk tag east of Wild Horse Reservoir. This is the third time we've had this happen in the last 4 years. Each time we assume it will be the last, and yet it continues to happen. 2 years ago, the department posted signs throughout the Jarbidge area describing the dramatic and obvious differences between elk and moose and urging hunters to be sure of their target. This man's camp was within 300 feet of one of those signs. Southern Region Game Warden investigated the self-reported accidental killing of a large 6x6 bull elk taken on a deer tag in the Tonopah area. Charges are pending. 2 Southern Region Game Wardens investigated a case in which 3 cow elk were accidentally shot on 1 cow tag in the Panaca area. Charges are also pending there. In Lincoln County, wardens are investigating a case in which 2 men killed an antelope outside of their prescribed area. Further information revealed that at least one of the men may be legally prohibited from possessing a firearm. Eureka County Game Warden is investigating a case in which a large bull elk was shot and left to waste near Highway 50. Those who have occasion to see the Reno Gazette-Journal may have seen a photograph of that bull on the front page above the fold. Bull elk season was not open in that area, so that press release is asking for the public's assistance on this case and has received widespread coverage. On September 29th, there was a boating fatality at Cummins Reservoir near Ely. 2 men were fishing from a small aluminum boat when it capsized. The owner of the boat, 36-year-old Ruth resident, lost his life when he drowned. Lake Mead Game Wardens assisted with 2 different drownings over Labor Day weekend. CPR was attempted but unsuccessful. Southern Region Game Wardens wrapped up the boating season with several arrests for operating vessels under the influence. The departments observed operating under the influence numbers were up this year compared to the last 3 or 4 years. Western Region Game Wardens assisted Nevada Highway Patrol and the Secret Service on October 27th for the Carson City visit of Vice President Mike Pence. Our wardens were asked to be posted near the highway in places where Washoe Lake duck hunters park. The assignment changed in complexion when the Washoe County Sheriff's Office Raven helicopter had a wire strike on Lakeview Hill and was forced into a hard landing in the northbound lanes of I-580. The transmission lines that were cut then started a brush fire, which threatened several homes on Duck Hill. All of this happened 2 to 3 minutes before the Vice President's motorcade arrived and passed by the chaotic scene. Thankfully, nobody was hurt in the incident, and the fire was quickly suppressed. Game wardens and the Operation Game Thief Coordinator held several unit watches in which the OGT Wall of Shame trailer was on display, with game wardens and biologists available for questions and hunt information. These public outreach events are set up at prominent roadside locations in busy hunt areas where a high volume of hunter traffic passes by. The proactive unit watches seem to cause a reduction in wildlife crime in the area. The Conservation Education Division, Conservation Education staff attended the Aquatic Education Resource Education Conference in Lake Tahoe. Representatives of both federal and state wildlife agencies were present at the conference, as well as the sport fish industry. Some of the conference topics included angler recruitment and retention, reactivation, utilizing partners to engage Hispanic audiences, best practices in the classroom, and federal aid grant reporting. Wildlife educators from all regions and headquarters attended the week-long Certified Interpretive Guide Trainer certification in late September in Reno. The training was offered through the National Association for Interpretation. The goal of obtaining the certification is so that NDOW staff can train and certify other NDOW staff, volunteers, and offer the Certified Interpretive Guide training and certification to other organizations and agencies. Con Ed staff presented a session at the Regional National Science Teachers Association Conference in early October here in Reno. This opportunity allows outreach opportunities with Nevada teachers to show them what programs NDOW has to offer that are aligned with the Nevada Academic Content Standards for Science and the Nevada Academic Content Standards for English Language, Arts, and Mathematics. Overall, the conference was very successful for NDOW. NDOW was one of 2 state agencies that were in attendance at the conference. Con Ed personnel promoted the youth waterfowl hunt at the Overton Wildlife Management Area by hosting a special event called Ducks and Donuts. 36 youth hunters showed up along with their mentors, a significant increase from previous years. As the event name implies, donuts and warm beverages were served. Thanks to the support from the Las Vegas Woods and Waters Club, Sportsman's Warehouse in Henderson, and Buck Gardner Calls, each hunter went home with a pair of duck calls and other hunting-related gear. Armscore in Pahrump donated a shotgun. The youth hunters bagged 45 birds, including a pair of Canada geese, 36 ducks, and 7 coots. Con Ed personnel attended the Fernley Outdoor Day with over 300 participants in attendance. Law enforcement brought the Operation Game Thief trailer, and Con Ed staff worked at archery, skulls, and hide stations. Another Western Region activity was the Duck Hunting 101 class at the Capital City Gun Club in Carson City. There were several lessons, including shot patterning and cleaning ducks in the field. Con Ed staff partnered with our Fisheries Division on the grand opening of Winnemucca's first urban pond. On October 13th, Endow opened James Kinney Pond to the public. Free food and raffle prizes were available, and over 150 people participated. Everyone caught fish and enjoyed a wonderful day on the water. Development of the new urban fishing pond was truly a partnership effort with major contributions and assistance from multiple Endow divisions, Humboldt County, and several private and corporate donors. Con Ed staff presented at the Chucker Chasers Foundation Youth Chucker Hunt in Paradise Valley. The event was free for all 50 youth students who attended. Instruction included hunter safety, upland game hunting 101, game care, and one-on-one instruction in the field. Statewide education activities have been vast, including Cast for Kids, Osprey Walk at the Clark County Wetlands Park, Desert Shores Fishing Derby, Wildlife Conservation Workshop, a Fall Harvest Outreach event at Spring Mountain Ranch State Park, Girl Scouts Leave No Trace Camp at the Oxbow Outdoor Education Center with 105 participants. Urban Wildlife Coordinator engaged the public in multiple speaking opportunities. We heard from Jessica yesterday. Most of those focusing on urban bears and coyotes. In the Habitat Division, water development crews have completed most of the new construction plan for this season and are starting the planning process for next year's construction season. This build season, the water development crews constructed 2 new units, performed major maintenance or complete rebuilds on 27 units, completed inspections and minor maintenance on 927 units, and hauled water to 19 units, totaling 68,000 gallons. Crews have installed exclusionary fencing around 8 natural springs so far this year and have up to 10 more planned over the next 2 years in a growing effort to protect natural spring systems. In an effort to reduce vehicle collisions with bighorn sheep near Walker Lake on Highway 95, the department will be installing 2 temporary water tanks in the Wussock Mountains while locating and obtaining authorization for 1 or 2 permanent locations. This is one of several strategies the Department of Wildlife and Department of Transportation are using to reduce the frequency of bighorn sheep crossing Highway 95 and being struck on the highway. The Technical Review Program has been providing wildlife recommendations through the National Environmental Policy Act, review for greater sage grouse, resource management plan revisions, I-11 alternatives analysis, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service candidate conservation agreement with assurances, Naval Air Station Fallon baseline biologic reports, and proposed policy changes to the Endangered Species Act. Other activities within the program include working with the BLM to expand Endow's ability to manage wildlife and habitat restoration activities in wilderness areas. The botulism outbreak that started late summer at the Carson Lake wetlands near Fallon subsided in early October with the cooler temperatures. This outbreak resulted in Greenhead Hunting Club and Endow closing the area to hunting prior to the youth waterfowl hunt on September 22nd and continuing into the general waterfowl opener on October 6th. The area was opened to hunting on October 13th. The Data and Technology Services Division, the License Office continues to support ongoing hunts in the field by providing customer assistance for reporting harvest return cards, coordinating with Con Ed and the Game Division to provide updated field condition and disease monitoring information, and process tag returns and alternate tag allocations. License Office staff met with Calcami at our headquarters office last month to plan for the upcoming vessel registration and big game application seasons and is working closely with all department staff and our contractor to bring additional improvements to the licensing system for the upcoming year. In the Wildlife Diversity Division, wildlife diversity biologists continue to track 8 ferruginous hawks that were outfitted with satellite radio trackers earlier this year. All successfully fled from the nest, and all left Nevada shortly after, potentially due to low ground squirrel abundance this year. Most went to Idaho or Montana, but one did fly to Utah. That particular individual returned to Nevada fairly quickly and was subsequently predated on by a golden eagle. Another bird died from rodenticide poisoning in Idaho, and a third died of unknown causes. The movement patterns of these birds has been very interesting, with one bird even traveling to San Francisco before heading to Fresno, where it's been for some time now. In conjunction with the Clark County and the Nevada Division of Minerals, 50 bat gates were installed in the Gold Butte area in the Virgin Mountains. A number of other abandoned mines were permanently closed. 3 gates were specially designed to allow desert tortoise access to the mine, and coincidentally, when the construction crew was leaving the area, they observed a tortoise leaving one of these mines. Over the next several months, the division will be working with these same partners, in addition to Nevada State Parks, to install bat gates at 2 sites within the Valley of Fire State Park. One of these sites houses a significant maternity colony of Yuma myotis. It's a bat. 9 Gila monsters and 13 tortoises were tracked weekly or semi-weekly at Red Rock National Conservation Area. This is a collaborative effort with the BLM and should help inform land management decisions, as well as help us understand habitat use at a finer scale. Staff compiled and summarized 18 years of yellow-billed cuckoo survey data, which was provided to the Fish and Wildlife Service. The service is reviewing this species for a possible delisting. In the Western region, wildlife diversity biologists have been assisting the Nevada Division of Forestry with implementation of the Spooner Landscape Resilience Project at Lake Tahoe Nevada State Park. Conifers were hand-thinned and removed by helicopter across a 300-acre area near Spooner Lake. NDOW conducted wildlife surveys and provided wildlife management recommendations prior to the project, and 8 days were spent assisting with the project implementation and oversight. In addition, 60 spotted owl pellets were collected in the park. Pellets will be dissected and analyzed this winter for the first diet analysis of the spotted owls in Nevada. That concludes the department activity report, and as always, thank you for your patience and letting me share many of the interesting and important work that we do across the Department of Wildlife.
Thank you, Secretary Wosley. Any questions? With that, we'll move on to the litigation report. Deputy Attorney General Josh Woodbury. A report will be provided on Nevada Department of Wildlife litigation. Deputy Attorney General Woodbury.
Thank you. On our litigation report, we have 8 items of litigation. Most of those have been on here for a while and don't have any recent changes. 2 matters I'll talk about is number 8, the last one on the list, Ridgetop Holdings LLC versus Wakeling. This was a defamation suit brought in Truckee, Nevada, alleging defamation for comments by NDOW employees. The parties had stipulated to dismiss this case in Truckee, and that was in our previous reports, and the judge has now granted that stipulation to dismiss, and so the case has been dismissed in full, and this matter will no longer appear on future updates as it's been resolved. Item number 7 is Smith versus Wakeling in Washoe County Court. This is basically the same case with the same individuals as the Truckee case. And so it's a defamation case, Mark Smith alleging defamation by NDOW employees. And this also includes claims for alleged First Amendment violations for removal of comments and blocking on NDOW's Facebook page. The parties have just recently begun discovery in this, and so we'll start with document disclosures and I imagine depositions, and we have a trial date set for July 2019, and so we'll be working towards that date. Those are the only recent updates I have. I'll take any questions if there are.
Thank you. Any questions for Deputy Attorney General Woodbury? Sorry. Seeing none, I just want to make an interest of absolute and full disclosure that litigation number 3, the United States and Walker River Paiute Tribe versus the Walker River Irrigation District, that litigation involves all the water right holders on the Walker River system in light of where it's at, I'm actually becoming actively involved in that litigation on behalf of my clients. And as it stands right now, my clients are aligned with the Department of Wildlife and where they're at in the case. I just want to disclose that. I don't think it presents any type of issues or anything like that, but I did want to disclose that I am involved in that litigation on behalf of several water right holders. Any other questions on the litigation report? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is Tag Allocation and Application Hunt Committee report. Commissioner and Committee Chairman Brad Johnston. The commission will hear a report on the committee's recent meeting. So the TAC committee met yesterday morning prior to the commission meeting. I want to thank all the members of the committee as well as members of the public who attended. I thought it was a very productive meeting, and a lot of things were done from that committee to ask staff to develop some regulatory proposals based upon a TAC topic list. As we've gone through that, it may not be exciting to others, but it's exciting to me because when I started on the TAC committee 6-7 years ago, that list was almost unmanageable and 30-some pages. It's down to about 7. It should be down to about 4 by the next TAC committee meeting. One thing we did do, and it was a topic that had come up both at the commission level and at the TAC committee, was the idea of certain individuals being able to fill someone else's tag under certain circumstances, or potentially very limited instances where big game tags could be transferred. There was a question whether that would require statutory change. We took a look at NRS 501376. That statute talks about that a tag issued for hunting is not valid if it's knowingly used by a person other than the person specified on the tag, but that statute says except by commission regulation. And then in the administrative code, it's an administrative code that says except as otherwise provided, you cannot transfer or give a tag to someone else. So we've asked the Deputy Attorney General to take a look at those statutes and regulations, because it may be that this commission has the ability under the Nevada Administrative Code and the existing statutes to create these programs, whether it be novice hunter, youth hunter programs, and potentially other types of transfers. Some of the public comment was we do not want to have a free-for-all, for lack of a better term, on transfer of big game tags. That's certainly not the issues before the TAC, nor has anyone expressed any desire for that. It is very much very, very limited circumstances with very specific defined criteria that we hope to develop. So first step is to find out, can the commission do it at the regulatory level? At first blush, I think we can, but we ask for confirmation from the Attorney General's office. There will be a number of items, I think, coming out of the TAC to the commission. And I'm going to go through them just to put them not only on the commission's radar screen, but also those members of the public and the CAB who were not in attendance. One was the notion of party bonus points, and this has been a recurring item where a group of individuals will put in for a party hunt. One individual in that party has a substantial number of bonus points. That number of bonus points in the group is averaged, so if Commissioner McNinch had 12 and I had 0, we effectively get 6 going into the draw. If we're successful in the draw, we've heard this for some, Commissioner McNinch gives back his tag, which is permitted. He gets his bonus points restored. I keep my tag. I hunt. Now next year, we go into next year, we do a party hunt again, and I get the benefit of his bonus points recurring. There's more and more anecdotal evidence of this occurring from a number of people from the public. And so this was listed as some change needed to be made. It's listed as a 1 likely on the TAC topic list. And we have asked the department to come back with us with a regulatory proposal that's basically an all or nothing thing. Since the party goes into the draw as a party, then once the draw occurs, you need to treat them as a group as well. So that if one person gives back their tag, they all need to, or they all lose the bonus points going forward. Kind of an all or nothing. Because as it stands now, they're treated as a group going into the draw, but then treated separately after the draw. And to prevent this type of abuse, want to make it consistent both pre and post draw. So that would be likely coming. I believe will be coming up at some point in time in the future, and I think this is a timing issue with the legislative session. Proposed regulation that active military on deployment will not lose their bonus points if for some reason they don't put into the draw for obviously understandable reasons while they're deployed during the 2-year period. So we can expect that to come before the commission. Another thing that I need clarification on, because I could not recall, there was the idea, and we recommended it to the commission, but I don't know if they've done this, is that there are certain hunts that may exist that are not open to non-residents, giving those non-residents an opportunity to put in for a bonus point, so that if that hunt ever becomes open, they might have a leg up, so to speak, because they decided to buy bonus points while it was closed to them. For example, Rocky Mountain Bighorn right now. I don't know if we ever did resolve that, but that was something that the commission was supposed to undertake, and I don't know if we did. I don't think we did. And so that'll be coming to the commission. I already talked a little bit about the apprentice tag or youth tag, being able, novice hunter, defining that and try to come up with a scenario where that could occur, where if I drew a tag, someone who met certain criteria could fill my tag if I was with them on the hunt. So we're going to be looking at some specific proposals with respect to that. Another regulation that we're going to look at is that currently, if someone is a junior hunter, they can put in for particular hunts if they're going to turn 12 by the opening day of that hunt, but they're not allowed to put in for a bonus point if they're not 12 by the earliest hunt. And we're going to open up, hopefully, I think the direction of the committee would be any youth who would be eligible to put in for a tag for a particular species could put in for a bonus point as well, even if they couldn't put in for every. There was discussion about a junior hunt can only, a junior hunter can only apply for the junior hunt on 5 occasions. There was a question whether we should expand that to 6. We decided not to do that, and that was moved to the closed topic list. We had a number of items on the TAC topic list regarding the landowner tag program. We decided to send all those to the landowner compensation tag committee that's going to be established per the prior commission meeting so that they could deal with these issues. If they're going to be looking at the program, the feeling of the TAC committee was that committee should look at those issues rather than the TAC committee separately. There was some discussion about potential rut hunts, and we, as a committee, felt that where we're at now provided for certain opportunities, and that did not need to be pursued for any changes given the availability and the season structure that we had. And I think it was important to the committee that both, probably the 2 counties that I think would be affected by that most, White Pine and Lincoln County, were in favor of no change. And another final topic that has been discussed and that we're going to receive some more input from the department is whether or not the commission's quota setting could occur before the application. And Game Administrator Wakeling noted how certain species could probably be done, but also with others, particularly deer and elk, it could could present some challenges to the department. There's also some concern that the March commission meeting would be bogged down both in season setting and quota setting, which could be, take up that entire meeting and prevent other business from being accomplished. So we're going to hear from the department about the pros and cons or the possibility of doing that. Right now, the committee sees that it might have some merit, but there are some details to be addressed before any action is taken. So with that, that was probably a longer summary than people wanted to hear. I might have even exceeded Secretary Wasley's department activity report, but that was the activity of the TAC committee. Any from the TAC committee members, anything I missed?
No, you did not.
So I want to thank everyone again for that meeting. I thought it was quite productive, and we have a number of items that have been on that list that seem to be advancing and will created a lot of work for Mr. Van Dellen, I think. So, and hopefully we can get some of these out of the committee and to the commission in relative short order. With that, we'll close agenda item 15D and move on to agenda item 15E, Predation Management Fiscal Year 2018 Report, Wildlife Staff Specialist Pat Jackson and Game Division Administrator Brian Wakeling. The Game Division will present the 2018 Predation Management Report per Commission Policy 23. The department shall prepare an annual predation management status report detailing results of the previous fiscal year's projects. This status report shall be presented at the last commission meeting of each calendar year. Mr. Jackson.
Pat Jackson, Predator Management Staff Specialist for the record. I'll see if this presentation is longer or shorter than the tag and the director's update. I don't know. Just to remind the commission, I provide a report at the November commission meeting on the previous fiscal year. NDOW's fiscal year runs July 1 to June 30 of the next year. So I'm about to report on fiscal year 2018. We are currently in fiscal year 2019 and following the fiscal year 2019 Predator plan. A little bit about the $3 fee. With every year, at least since I've been here, we've seen that go up. I'm expecting now to see about $700,000 in $3 fee revenue. Anytime anyone applies to a big game or turkey tag, they pay that $3 fee. It's important to note that you do not pay the fee when you just buy bonus points. So if you look at the total number of applications in the new Calcumi system, you can't just multiply it by 3 to get the new revenue. So from those fees, $14,000 is a transfer to the Nevada Department of Agriculture for an administrative fee that was set in the legislature. The remainder is spent on predator projects defined in the Predator plan. Also goes to staff salary and overhead. And if there's a remainder, it does remain in the $3 Predator fee account. It does not revert back to a general fund of any sort. And after the 2015 legislative session, we saw 3 different types of expenditures: management of predatory wildlife, research on lethal control techniques, and the protection of sensitive species. So with that, this is the budget summary for this year. If you look at the legislative language, it's there's a mandate now that we must spend 80% of revenues for the year of which we have accurate accounting. That means that we go back 2 fiscal years. You can see how it's kind of easy to lose track of which fiscal year we're referencing. So for the fiscal year 2018 plan, we had to use fiscal year 2016 revenues, and so 80% of $595,000, we needed to spend $476,505 to meet that 80% mandate. We spent $641,331, which was 108% of those revenues. The reason we've been able to go above the 80%, even over 100%, is when I first started, due to the remainder carrying over from one year to the next, we had a pretty large excess, and so we've been attempting to spend that down. And so combined with the $3 fee, and the available federal aid or Pittman-Robertson funds, we spent just over $1.25 million this year. I also would like to remind the Commission that with different types of projects, we have different levels of monitoring, standard, intermediate, and rigorous. A lot of our lethal control techniques focus on the lethal control aspect, and we consider that standard monitoring. And so we're not out collecting a lot of data to make inference on those projects. And so some of the things I'm going to report to you rely on the number of animals removed and at times reaching out to area biologists to see what they're seeing and how they think things went. So Project 21, this is common raven removal around the state for the sake of greater sage-grouse protection. Lethally remove common ravens. We work with Wildlife Services to conduct those removals. And we are issued a depredation permit. The common raven's a migratory bird. Our cap is 2,500. On this project, they removed 2,381 ravens. You can see the different management areas. They do the removal almost exclusively with a corvicide injected into a hard-boiled chicken egg, put in and around sage-grouse selects and nesting areas with an attempt to create a temporary void to increase sage-grouse nest success. So we spent just over $57,000 on this project. We had $100,000 earmarked, and we do believe there's a lot of merit in common raven removal, and the department recommends continuing Project 21. Project 2102 is a subset of that project where it's a more rigorous raven removal component in the Virginia mountains. Here on the same depredation permit from the Fish and Wildlife Service, we removed, or the Wildlife Services removed 108 ravens. This is a collaboration with the USGS. The funds that they receive from us to go out and monitor sage-grouse are not part of the $3 fee, so it's kind of a pretty good bang for the buck. A couple years ago, we saw an unexpected fire that changed the level of inference. The takeaway point that I've received from Pete Coates at the USGS was raven removal seemed to be having an effect until the fire came through, and then loss of habitat is substantially worse than raven depredation. However, not all of the Virginia's burned, and so there's still something to be learned. So due to the fire, we recommend extending this project a little more. As you can see, we spent just over $29,000 on this project. Project 2201, this is an attempt at establishing 2 struggling bighorn sheep herds, one in Unit 011 and one in Unit 013. And so we're removing mountain lions. That's a combination of Wildlife Services and private contractors. We're using private contractors in some areas. There's a lawsuit with Wild Earth Guardians, prevents Wildlife Services from commonly working in wilderness or wilderness study areas unless it's for the sake of human health and safety. So that's why we're working with a private contractor. And we also use some funds to purchase 5 GPS collars for 011 and another for 013. And we deployed 9 of those collars this year. And so Wildlife Services removed 7 lions in 011 and 3 in 013. The contractor removed 3 lions in 011. And we saw no mountain lion predation on marked bighorn sheep. That's a great sign. And we were able to keep 4 GPS collars online on sheep in 011 and 5 in 013. And we do support this project and its viability, and so we would continue or recommend continuing it until viability is reached as defined in the predator plan. And you can see that we did exceed the budget. We're comfortable with that. I'd like to note, and I realize that I'm looking at a different screen than you, but Wildlife Services expenditures, that's the amount that we paid Wildlife Services. NDOW lethal expenditures, that's the amount that we paid a contractor. And then if there's a total in the NDOW non-lethal expenditures, that means that's helicopter capture, purchase of GPS collars, et cetera. During the 2015 legislative session, the sponsor of the bill that changed the $3 fee said that monitoring could be a component of that 80% mandate on lethal expenditures. However, reporting out, I did not include that as lethal take. And so if it's NDOW non-lethal expenditures, it's monitoring of some component, but that did not go into the total of 108%. 22074 is a small population of sheep in 074. We've reached a point in the population where we're not actively removing mountain lions. We're maintaining GPS collars purchased on $3 fee on sheep, and then if we have a predation event, either from the sheep, from a collar, or we just happen to find a sheep killed by lions, we would attempt to remove that individual. We did capture and collar 5 bighorn sheep, and so we think that this population is somewhere between 25 and 30. And so in the capturing and collaring, we spent just under $5,000, and so well under budget on this. Project 32, this is one of those rigorous monitoring projects, mountain lion, black bear, and mule deer interactions. This is the first non-lethal project I'm presenting on today. Therefore, those funds are matchable with Pittman-Robertson, so it's a 3-to-1 match. Every $1 that we have for from a $3 fee can be matched with $3 of a federal aid, so we get a lot more bang for the buck. This is a multi-year project. It's winding down. The project's ending. In this last fiscal year, NDOW technicians visited 192 kill sites. The interest of this project was mountain lions obviously hunt and consume things, and they encouraging the recolonization of black bears in the state. So a mountain lion would kill a deer before, obviously takes a few days to consume it. Before it can completely consume the deer, does a black bear move in and kick that mountain lion off? And so if that happens, do mountain lions consume deer more regularly? Do they consume smaller prey they can eat all at once, or do they leave the area? And so we're replacing this project with, I believe it's Project 44, the black bear passive population model estimate. This is a collaboration with Wildlife Conservation Society. To just summarize, since its inception, we visited 126 kill sites this last fiscal year. Over the course of the study, we have over 35,000 GPS locations from 10 collared lions, over 60,000 GPS coordinates from 30 bears, and over 600 known predation events. And so those are defined either from deploying, the minority would be putting trail cameras out on kill sites to look at that bear-lion interaction, but more predominantly going to a GPS cluster and identifying what that mountain lion and or bear have eaten. And the report for this will be in the appendix found on the website. We had a total of 160,000 earmarked for this and spent just under 100,000. Project 37, big game protection mountain lions. This allows the department to respond to mountain lion predation events around the state for sensitive big game herds, and we use a combination of contractors and wildlife services. Trying to protect bighorn sheep predominantly. We removed 3 lions in 252 and 1 in 041. We had a private contractor remove 5 mountain lions in the snowstorms, and another private contractor who removed 1 lion in the Jacksons and 2 in the Delamars. And this project also allows us to go in, wanted to make this point, and remove lions immediately before, during a big game release if area biologists and staff deem that to be necessary. And so we also purchased 5 GPS collars and deployed 6 in the Delamar range. In fiscal year 2019, the Delamar range became its own standalone project, so next year I'll be reporting out differently. We had 175,000 earmarked for this and spent just over 200,000, and the department does recommend continuing this project. Big game protection coyotes. This is a similar project to what I just talked about. It's just coyotes instead of mountain lions. I work with area biologists around the state and ask for individuals that have underperforming pronghorn herds and believe that coyote predation on pronghorn fawns is the issue. And so then we use wildlife services to predominantly use aerial removal. There is a little bit of ground effort. And this year they removed 239 coyotes. And we would recommend continuing this project and having the ability to remove coyotes when we think they're a limiting factor for a big game population. Project 40, this is a multi-year project, coyote removal to complement multifaceted management in Eureka County. Before this project began, there were a few various other types of predator removal and habitat work in it was originally Unit 144. It's since been expanded to all of Area 14. We've since January 2017 GPS marked 13 does. 7 of those have been removed by mountain lions, and so this is now progressed into a coyote and mountain lion removal project. And this is exclusively using wildlife services. And so this last year, they removed 319 coyotes and 5 mountain lions. And you can see we spent just under $145,000 on this project. Project 41, this is another rigorous project, increasing understanding of common raven densities and space use in Nevada. This is a collaboration with the USGS. We've had Pete Coates talk about this project in the past. On the Endow side, we deployed 30 Argos transmitters. That's a GPS backpack that we put on chicks. We actively monitored 63 nests for fledging and also for diet. There's an interest, and we've put quite a few of our transmitters on chicks as they fall out of the nest. They're pretty easy to catch. We're also picking pellets up on a weekly basis with an interest in how raven diet changes over time during the raven nesting season, which occurs just before and during the sage-grouse nesting season. There's an interest in what the parents eat and then what the parents feed their chicks, and if that changes over time. And then Endow Techs also did 390 miles of transmission line surveys. Transmission lines are a large subsidy on the landscape that greatly increase raven density. Number one would be the nesting structures. What used to be a sea of sagebrush now has a lot of area that ravens can nest and raise a clutch, and so that's one reason we have more ravens on the landscape. Also allows them to forage a lot more efficiently. Instead of spending calories and energy flying around trying to find something to eat, they can just sit on a utility line or a pole and then just sit there and wait till they find a nest to eat it. So there's an interest in which utility lines and poles ravens avoid the most and why. We also did 978 raven point count and raptor surveys, and we're working with the USGS to build a model to be able to quickly identify raven densities to determine where raven removal needs to occur. On the USGS side, I'm only reporting on a subset. I would really recommend looking at the report that's online. It goes into much greater detail on everything that they've done. They used over 15,000 point counts. That was collected through both their effort and ours over the last several years. They built a really impressive raven population model. They found that ravens can be found in over 80% of the Great Basin at any given time. That resulted in a paper published in the Journal of Applied Ecology. The title's right there, and it was on October 15th, earmarked as the editor's pick. So that's a pretty prestigious journal, and that's a pretty prestigious award. In the Predator report, there's what's known as a DOI. You can just copy that, paste it in a web browser, and it'll pull that paper up if you want to read it. Raven density estimation, so figuring out. Now we know that there are ravens in 80% of the Great Basin at any given time. We want to know how many ravens there are. And so distance sampling is a way to estimate that. This is another variable they found out. So they looked, I realize I'm pointing at something you're not looking at, but densities often exceeded 4.4 ravens per square kilometer. And we're really starting to see a sage-grouse nest success drop off at 0.48 ravens per square kilometer. So this resulted in another manuscript submitted to the Condor. It was rejected with revisions, and they're ready to resubmit. And so we would recommend continuing this project. There's a lot of information that we are learning about ravens. They're an impressive predator that is currently growing at very rapid rates across Nevada and the rest of the Great Basin. And we spent just under $365,000 on this project. Project 42, assessing mountain lion harvest in Nevada. No work was performed on this. This is a contract that we have with 2 out-of-state professor. One's a professor and one's a postdoc. And then we're slowly working with in-state Nevada mountain lion researchers to get mountain lion GPS and survival data. That's taken a lot longer than we expected. We're going to be building an integrated population model that's a modern model that can take just about any type of data that a state has, survival data, harvest data, GPS data, age data, in any way. We're just now getting ready to pull the trigger, and so this time next year I will have something to report on. Project 43, meso predator removal to predominantly protect waterfowl and turkeys on 2 wildlife management areas. We reached out to our wildlife management area folks, and they identified these 2, and so this is a collaboration with Wildlife Services. The department recommends continuing this pending funding, and you can see that this was in Mason Valley and Overton, and we spent just over $41,000 on this project this year. Here's the overall budget. If you look at the bottom row, the ending balance, you can see what we had in 2016, and that has been slowly dwindling down. It's our hope to keep that remainder no lower than $200,000 for a rainy day. And it's important to note that these numbers are different than the numbers that went out to support material, and hence the revised. I worked with my fiscal division, and they spent half a day going back and recrunching the numbers and provided me with something slightly different. And so with that, I will entertain any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Jackson? Commissioner East.
Thank you, Pat. Can you go back to the budget, the last slide you just had, so that if I'm not a math person, the ending balance for FY 2019 projected, that 398 will go into the next fiscal? Is that correct? Does that roll over? Is that what you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions. And it's just because I'm new to some of this. Do you have a number of predators, a sustainable number of predators per big game, like we do with fawn to doe ratio? Do you have a number like that? No?
Pat Jackson, staff specialist for the record. I want to make sure I understand your question correctly. So are you asking if we have an ideal number of predators for prey per unit or per?
Yes.
No, we don't.
No. Okay. Is that something we could get to? I just feel like this may be not enough. And my next question is, if you had all the budget that you could get to, all the money you could have, what would you ask for predator management?
Maybe I can weigh in here a little bit, Pat.
Well, I'm just getting ready to use in my imagination. But
Yeah. Pat scares me sometimes.
Metaphorically, I mean.
As awesome as that presentation was, I'm going to throw you a lifeline. So your question, it's a valid question, but in reality, in systems, you have multiple predators and multiple prey. You have different home range size, and so it varies. It's so highly variable. If you had a simple system with a single predator and a finite number of prey, let's say species and number, the smaller the area, the more simple it is to define. But we've seen situations in Nevada where historically, maybe there wasn't horses and maybe there wasn't elk, and the lions would follow the deer in and follow the deer out. But with the presence of horses and elk, now the lions can stay there and they have an alternate prey, so they prey switch at different times of the year. And so that, you expand your prey base, you can expand your predator base. And so the challenge is finding, an area, geographic area that's small enough to be able to do what you're talking about and be able to target those bottlenecks. And so with mule deer, for example, if we can focus on winter range and you can focus on fawning areas, those are kind of bottlenecks where those animals are pinned down predictably. There's a high cost associated with predator avoidance. And so I don't know that we could ever get there, and it would be highly variable from one unit to the next, depending on the number of predators, types of predators, and the number of prey and types of prey. To your second question about if we had all the money in the world, the thing about predator control can allow a population to respond more quickly to favorable habitat conditions. When we look at how much we're spending, we want to be really strategic in that, and that's where some of the tools that science is providing us and some of our own research is providing us is where we can increase the likelihood of realizing the intended benefit. And historically, the approach was kind of 1,000 random acts of predator control. And now if you look at Eureka County and you look at Area 14, where when Chad Bliss was on the commission, we talked about some habitat treatment, we talked about horse gathers, and we talked about predator control in conjunction with those habitat treatments based on the idea that predator control can allow a population to respond more quickly to favorable habitat conditions. And that was a perfect example on the raven issue. Predator control provided the raven some benefit, but once it burned, the habitat wasn't there, and so it's a little bit different strategy. So the question is, is there enough money in the world? And in the short term, in some areas, the answer is maybe, but in the long term, you know, the analogy that Joel Blakesley once gave me was just like trying to dig a hole in water. And when you have these predator, look at the home range size of a mountain lion, and you have, you know, states adjacent to us that have different laws and regulations and populations and prey bases, it complicates our ability to have widespread benefits and long-lasting benefits. And so what we try to do is we try to be strategic in areas where it's identified as a limiting factor, try to go in and strategically release those populations from that limitation and get to a level where they can sustain what might be interpreted as a natural level of predation. But what a natural level of predation is, I don't know, that might have been your original question. Is there a natural balance where it's sustainable? And it's so variable in time and space and weather conditions. And a big winter, they're concentrated, they're automatically more susceptible. A drought, fewer water sources, they're concentrated on fewer water sources, automatically more susceptible. And so it's a moving target.
Okay. And then my last question, if I may. Yesterday, we heard a really great report on the translocation of the bighorn sheep, and Mike Cox mentioned that he's working with you on the predator management, maybe preliminary stuff, and I just want to reiterate that that's really important, I think, to me at least. So that's it for me. Thanks.
Commissioner Hubbs.
Just going on that topic, I'm thinking, though, it's important to know that in natural systems, predator-prey ratios do exist, and they typically do balance one another out over time if there's no interference. And that I believe sometimes and I could be incorrect here, we're targeting predators to actually, like you stated, jumpstart populations, protect susceptible populations. But typically in natural systems left alone, that works itself out. You don't get an excess of too many predators that take over habitat if everything else was removed from the equation. Is that correct?
Yes and no. I mean, it can, what you're talking about in ecological terms, I think it's called an equilibrium, but that equilibrium is a dynamic equilibrium. And you look no further than the snowshoe hare and the lynx example, which is the common example in predator-prey dynamics, and complete absence of any management. I mean, that's all over the place, right? There's natural cycles in all the populations we deal with, and so they attain a balance at any given space and time, but it isn't stable. It's not a stable equilibrium, and as populations grow due to favorable habitat conditions, as we saw in the 80s, we watched the lion population grow, and then you introduce alternate prey items like horse, elk. We're seeing all of our ungulate populations, with the exception of mule deer, are growing. Our horse populations are growing, and so we've documented pretty clearly that as our population, our ungulate, the prey base grows, so do lions. When we see the population decline, we see more prey switching behavior in the lions. They don't necessarily have a commensurate decline. And so even though some systems may have a stable equilibrium, our system, I don't think would lend itself to that kind of stable equilibrium because it's so variable climatically, habitat conditions, whether it's a fire, whether it's a drought, whether it's a big winter. The Great Basin is pretty harsh climate. Horses weren't abundant in the numbers, weren't present in the numbers they now are. Elk, similarly. So it's a system that's already perturbed to the point where achieving a stable equilibrium is highly unlikely. And even in the absence of all that perturbation, that equilibrium would likely be pretty dynamic.
Right, no, I understand that it's dynamic over time, but eventually one will check the other. It's not, in those systems with, like you were saying, with the links and the hair and those types of situations, you'll have an increase in one, followed by an increase in the other, a large drop in the other, followed by the drop in the predator. It's kind of going in and around some type of equilibrium over time. It doesn't get highly skewed and go off
Well,
where, and if it does, it seems like it would check, but wait, what I'm hearing from you is that you're saying is that there's new predator or new prey sources, so they just switch over to new prey sources, and that those prey sources have come from perturbations to the natural system. So at this point in time, we don't even really know what a natural system might look like if left alone.
I'd say that's accurate. And the reason why the lynx and hare example is used so prevalently in biology classes is because it's a really simple system. You have one prey and one predator. But when we look at our role in wildlife management, all populations are cycling. There's peaks and troughs in all populations. The same thing would happen, in mule deer if left unchecked, or elk. And the density of hares, for example, may get so high that disease or famine wipes that population out, and there's a whole lot of death. So in those unmanaged populations, you see higher highs, lower lows, more dynamic. And our role as managers is to lower the peaks and raise the troughs so it's more stable through time. There's still those fluctuations, but through regulated harvest, we're preventing, explosions, habitat degradation, crashing of populations, but there are a whole lot of pieces to it. Even the super simple system of one predator, one prey of snowshoe and lynx, they're chasing. They don't ever get to this point where there is a stable number of hares and a stable number of lynx as a result of the number of hares. They actually have higher highs and lower lows in the absence of management, where there are more severe crashes, higher peaks with the potential of habitat impacts from that. Highly dynamic, a lot of variables, really challenging situation.
Additional questions? Commissioner Valentine.
Mr. Jackson, has there been any traction on changing the number of take for the Raven in Nevada? I don't know if that's a question for you or a question for Director Wasley.
Pat Jackson, Staff Specialist for the record. I don't really get to answer many of these questions. I think I'll just let the Director Wasley answer that.
Thanks, Matt. Upward delegation, I like it. So Wildlife Services was sued relative to inadequate NEPA. The finding was inadequate NEPA in wilderness areas. Part of their effort to address the claims in the suit was to redo their environmental review in compliance with NEPA. What that has done, it's in draft form. They're anticipating a decision on that, a record of decision. Originally, it was anticipated in September, but I think there's something on the horizon, and very soon, in the next month or two. And what that does is, in draft form, and assuming there is a decision in support of it, is it acknowledges not only that raven numbers the population has increased. The previous number of permitted ravens for take in the state of Nevada, I believe, was 5,000, and that was based on no more than 3% of a population that was 103, with some pluses and minuses. I know that math doesn't really work out if you figure 3% of 103,000, but it was roughly a population of 103,000, I believe, or 110,000. Maybe it was 110,000, 3% of 110,000. So what the new document has done is it has acknowledged that the raven population is actually much higher than what was contained in the previous document, and I believe it's estimated at or above 150,000. So not only does it raise that, but it also raises the safe level in terms of percentage of take. And I think that might be from 3% to somewhere in the neighborhood of 6%. If approved in its current form, I think it might increase the allowable take of ravens from that 5,000 to something more along the lines of 15,000 per year. So it's a long-winded answer of yes to your question is, has there been any traction? And so at this point, I would say that we're waiting for the decision on the environmental review to comply with the NEPA requirements that Wildlife Services is undertaking right now.
Any additional questions?
And just for clarification, Pat, we're also still implementing predator control on an as-needed basis, and those results are separate and apart from this report with the $3 fee legislatively. Is that correct? So, I mean, if there's problematic areas that aren't included in the report, are you still utilizing the predator control in those areas? But obviously, it wouldn't be included in the projects that you delineated the year before.
Pat Jackson, Staff Specialist for the record. To make sure I understand your question correctly, are you asking, are we doing predator removal and not including it in the report? No. If we conduct predator removal with $3 fee, I include it in the report in some capacity.
Is there any predator removal that's not associated with a $3 fee?
Yes. So the thing that comes to my mind would be for health and human safety, as was mentioned during the director's update. That's not $3 fee in an urban coyote situation.
And is that rare that occurs?
That probably depends upon your definition of rare. I wouldn't say it's common.
Yeah, just to add, there's been, I don't know, maybe half a dozen coyotes removed statewide. It could be a few more, it could be a few less. Almost all of them are seeking individual offending animals that have grown aggressive due to feeding, as referenced in the report. I think we've had a couple out here at USA Parkway. We had a couple at the mine. We have another mine site right now where there's an animal, aggressive animal. So yeah, it's single digits. And I don't know if you want to include bears in that definition, but certainly euthanasia of chronic bear issues has resulted in a similar number of euthanasia. So again, it's one or two here, one or two there. It isn't a significant number statewide over the course of the year.
Any additional questions? Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Yeah.
And then Brian, Staff Administrator Brian Wakeling has something to add to my update.
Mr. Wakeling.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, we thought we'd take this opportunity to provide you with an update on a project that was initially introduced through one of the predator management plans. And there's been some information, discussions, kind of, I think that largely indicate that there's some confusion and maybe some misinformation out regarding some of the work that was done on that. Late in 2014, both Mr. Jackson and I started employment with the Nevada Department of Wildlife. Very shortly after we got here, some of the information that we were informed about was dealt with mountain lions that were inadvertently captured in foothold traps. And at that time, we put together a project that was designed to look at that, and we introduced it initially in the fiscal year 2016 Predator Plan. It was introduced in January of 2014. We presented it to the commission, and we kind of started discussing the possibilities of initiating that research. As we did that, there was also an awful lot of ongoing confusion and things kind of going on with the legislature. We could see that there were some things associated with the predator fee that was very likely to result in some changes. And so at that point, as we were developing the plan, the department made the choice to withdraw that particular project. It was named number 36 at the time. We withdrew that project from the Predator Plan. However, despite the fact that we pulled it from the plan, we still felt like it was very important to continue with the research and the investigation that was associated with that. There's a lot of reasons why we felt that this was still very important. For one, we had some litigation that had been initiated against the department that brought in questions. The department had been involved in the research and partially funded the research that was done. That was subsequently published about this time last year with the findings that lions being caught inadvertently in foothold traps could potentially result in substantial additional mortality that had not been detected previously. In that research that was published, there was the research itself identified that very few, in fact, only 1 out of 19 adult mountain lions that had not been initially caught in traps were ever caught in traps. However, once they were, a lot of the animals that were introduced into this research had been caught in a foothold trap initially, and or some other type of trap. And so the research that was published was not really designed to answer that question. However, with the ongoing litigation, the principal investigator from that research had been subpoenaed, was scheduled to appear in court to testify. And so there was a lot of reasons why we didn't have the best research out there to really look at this. We didn't have, we had a lot of issues ongoing. And in addition, we were involved with the initial research, and it's incumbent upon us, if we recognize that there may be some form of mortality that we had previously not detected or wasn't aware of the magnitude, that it was important for us to investigate that. So we've gone ahead and we're investigating the survival of mountain lions that are inadvertently captured in a foothold trap. And it's something that's been ongoing for the past 2 years. It basically on the same schedule that was originally proposed with the predator fee or the predator report. We have not used any predator fee dollars in this investigation. Investigation has been part of a Pittman-Robertson funded project, and we're using sportsman's revenue to investigate that. To date, we've investigated 24 lions that have been reported that have been caught in foothold traps. The first year, we had 16 of the animals were detected. At that point in time, we had yet to really develop how we were going to be working on this. And so 5 animals were euthanized basically in the trap that we probably may not have euthanized had we had the investigation really well lined out. We radio marked 7 animals in the first year. We've radio marked 6 in the second year. Of those 13 animals, only 3 of those have died at this point in time based on the data that we have available. 2 of them were harvested by hunters, and 1 of them died as a result of injuries in a trap. The data, this is extremely preliminary. We don't have enough data at this point in time to be able to reach any conclusive information. But we wanted you to be aware of it. We wanted to have this information, you to be aware that we were conducting this investigation, the reasons why we were doing it. And if you happen to have any questions, I'd be certainly glad to try and respond to them.
Any questions for Mr. Wakeling?
I had a quick question. Were those all the lines that were reported in the trap? So there could have been more, or do you know of more? And those were the only ones that you visited and actually saw?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Hubbs, we don't have every single animal that every single trapper may have captured. What we have is what we think is a representative sample when a trapper happens to catch one. Part of the challenges that we've had with this is in some instances, in order to us be able to do a thorough investigation, what we've tried to do is take these animals, sedate them, bring them into the health lab where we're able to do an evaluation of the animal, take an x-ray of the foot that was captured, and be able to get it back out. So in some instances, animals are too far away from the health lab in order to be able to do that effectively. However, in some instances, we've brought them from as far as Elko, transported them in, went ahead and analyzed them, and then returned them back to the point of capture. Within this last year, we've also acquired a new portable x-ray machine that allows us to go to the field and do these things in a more efficient manner as well. So we're certainly not getting every single animal that's being captured, but we are trying to get a representative sample, and it's going to have to take a few years to be able to get the sample that we need to be able to say with the degree of statistical power what the effects are. And ultimately, the objective with all this is not to come up with our whole objective is to come up with a set of best management practices similar to what has been done for a lot of other activities, because trapping remains an important management tool, but we want to be able to provide information so that trappers and the public know what are the best methods, what factors are associated with the greatest chances of survival, the least chances of injury, and so that's what the objective of this work is.
Mountain lions are trapped. Are you finding that most of them have some type of broken paw or leg in that area? Is that how they're getting trapped, I'm assuming? And then is there damage to them in that? I mean, what is the typical type of damage to their limbs? Is it breaking, or is it just sometimes can they actually escape without breaking a leg? I guess that's my point.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Hubbs, the types of injuries, range widely. And so typically what we're seeing, and a lot of this can be, and that's why it's so important to conduct an x-ray, because in some cases there may not be any evidence of an injury whatsoever. So what we're looking for is, is there a dislocated joint? Is there a broken bone? What do the lacerations, are there lacerations? How does it appear? And so what we're hoping to be able to do, in addition to the best management practices, also be able to give field personnel the best indication of whether or not this animal is one that can recover, or one that, because one that may look bad may not be as bad as some that don't appear to be very bad at all. And so we're looking at what types of traps, what types of anchors, the whole suite of variables associated with the trap itself, and how does that influence the injury.
Anything further? Thank you, Mr. Wakeling.
Thank you.
Mr. Janae, are you ready to go? Sure. Is everyone ready to go, or does anybody need a break? Let's go.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, can I introduce this topic? So at our last meeting in Las Vegas.
I think I need to read the agenda first, don't I?
Please.
I was chastised down in Lincoln County when I didn't do that.
Because that's what,
Not by me.
Not by you, of course.
not by anybody near him to his left or anything either.
So we'll move on to Agenda item 15F, importance of sagebrush ecosystems report, Habitat Division Administrator Alan Janay, and apparently Secretary Wasley.
Thank you,
The
Mr. Chair.
department will share recently developed regional campaigns designed to increase awareness and elevate the importance of the sagebrush ecosystem. I don't know if I should recognize Mr. Janay, but I'll go to Secretary Wasley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
I'll be brief. You may recall at our September commission meeting in Las Vegas, when Mr. Janay was providing a fire update, things were fairly dire given the vast acreage and wildlife impacts that we were seeing on the landscape. And I believe it was you, Mr. Chairman, that asked the question, is there something that we can do? Is there something happening? And I think that was a sentiment echoed by some of your peers. And I, at that time, had volunteered to have the department provide an update specific to some of the regional efforts that the department was part of to elevate the importance of this ecosystem, with one of the stated goals is trying to change some of the societal core values around the sagebrush ecosystem and elevate it in the eyes of firefighters and others. And so I believe Mr. Janay is prepared to give you an update on some of those campaigns and efforts that are focused on elevating the importance of ecosystem that's near and dear to all of us.
Thank you. Mr. Janay.
Great. Good morning, Chairman, members of the Commission. Again, for the record, Alan Janay, Habitat Division Administrator. So the history, Tony's provided that. If you remember yesterday, hang on. That's not working. I'll go to finger puppets here in a second. Okay. That's all right.
Just blame it on Chet, he's not here today.
All right, let's try it. Yep, looks good. Maybe. No.
Maybe we should have taken a break.
So if you remember yesterday, I went through the fire rehabilitation efforts and what we're looking at doing this year. And so, you know, thinking about efforts that the department and the commission are moving forward with within sagebrush systems. Definitely, you know, in 2017, we worked on 43,000 acres with 2.3 million. This year, we've got 2.9 going into this 2018 fire season. Next slide. Other things that we're working on at the same time, just right now, we probably have 15,000 acres worth of pinyon juniper work going on within this conifer expansion zone. Next slide. Other things that we're working on, spring meadow protection. Here's a list of some of the projects that we have going. 7,000 linear feet of pipe rail fencing, like the kind you see here in Ruby Valley, working with Kinross Gold in a partnership to protect brood rearing in Long Valley Slough. Snowstorms, we're working on a fencing project up there for meadow protection on brood rearing, late brood rearing habitat. In association with the Orvaca Hot Springs Ranch. And then Divine, Spring, Hayes Canyon Range in Washoe County. We're working with permittees up there and Bureau of Land Management to do some spring protection projects. Many of the people in the audience and some of the folks on the commission are familiar with those types of projects where sometimes we'll fence those off and provide troughing outside the fence to protect that spring source, but still allow access to it for cattle and other livestock that can't get inside the fence. Next slide. So here's a real good example of a project that we worked on. As you can tell, it's a pinyon juniper project, but it also has a meadow restoration component to it. And this is one of the things that we do through the Nevada Partners of Conservation and Development Program. One of the major things is monitoring to actually see the results in what we do. So if you hit this one more time, you'll see the change. This is working with, land management agencies and the permittee to not only do the pinyon juniper work to allow the shrub expansion in the background, but also to allow that restoration activity within that meadow complex. And so we do see good success with these types of projects. Next slide. Thinking about what we do collectively, it's really interesting. I did this yesterday and early this morning, just kind of going back and looking at what the Board of Commissioners has allocated just through heritage projects. If you remember, back in Dyer, we had that report through the Heritage Committee of what had been done. I went back through those numbers, and from 1998 to 2018, there were 67 projects funded through Heritage that allocated $2.6 million towards sagebrush habitats. And so the commission has taken a pretty active role in that since 1998. There were definitely hiccups in the commission's priority at various times, if you remember, but there has been quite an emphasis by the commission in doing habitat projects in sagebrush communities. Another one that you look at is the habitat conservation fee projects. Looking back just a short timeline, because I was kind of pressed. Looking at 2015 to the 2019, which was approved this last July as far as fiscal year. Just in those 4 years, 1.6 coming out of habitat conservation fee, 250,000. Question 1 bond, if you recall that's that conservation bond that was approved by the voters. I believe it was originally $25 million that was allocated towards wildlife, and within that there was about 3.6 that was actually spent on sagebrush communities. Looking at mitigation funds such as everybody's familiar with the Ruby Pipeline project as it went across the state. There was a mitigation fund set up off of that, 5.75 of mitigation funds associated with some other projects that also had mitigation dollars. And then looking at wildfire rehabilitation, including the numbers that I put out there yesterday, easily $10 million plus. Excuse me. And so when you look at that, looking back to 1998 to 2018, darn near $24 million, and that's kind of like skimming the surface. I really didn't dig really deep. I was just trying to grab those sources of information that were most easily assimilated, and so that shows a pretty good emphasis by not only the commission but also by NDOW in trying to do something proactive or reactive to maintain sagebrush communities. Other things that we're working on, next slide, please. When you think about partnerships that we're trying to, increase our efficiencies by types of partnerships, the Partners for Conservation and Development, Lee Turner, our conservation ecologist, that works for the department. He oversees this program. It was modeled after the Utah Partners for Conservation and Development program, which is now the Utah Watershed Restoration Initiative. Those guys do amazing things over there. They get I think it's $1 million or $2 million out of the legislature annually, but they've got a ton of partners, and that's what we modeled this program after. It's got 6 different state and federal agencies, a collective of 12. And it's all about trying to, pool the resources and put forward the most effective and efficient projects possible. And so sometimes what that means is if we have a drill cart or a drill seeder that's available and BLM needs it, we absolutely move that around, let them use it. If we have a contractor that they don't have access to, it's about moving those funds to where we can implement, save money, and get the project done, you know, typically quicker, more efficiently. Next slide, please. Oh. My clicker isn't working. Back one. There you go. Okay, sorry. Sage Grouse Initiative is another project that we're involved with. If you recall, this is a farm bill program administered through NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service. It's a program by which they're trying to do sagebrush conservation on private lands and public lands associated with private permits. And it started in 2010. Right now, across 11 western states, they've worked with over 1,474 ranchers to conserve over 5.6 million acres of sagebrush community. One of the things within the SGI program that we currently have is we have 2 positions that we've partnered with them. Nevada Department of Wildlife funds those positions in cooperation with the Sage Grouse Initiative and Pheasants Forever. And we've got a position that will soon be hired in Winnemucca. It's vacant right now, but it'll be hired in Winnemucca. And then we've got another one in Elko. And so they work with private landowners and permittees to try to look at their systems and how they're managing lands and see if there are opportunities there for you know, benefits to sagebrush communities or things that they can do that'll allow for improvements within their system to have habitat improvements. In addition to those 2 SGI positions, we additionally have 2 private lands biologists. One's in Reno, one's in Elko, and those positions are also targeted towards that mission of trying to work with private landowners to try to foster projects for wildlife and wildlife habitat on private lands. Next slide, please. Most recently, if any of you were looking at the NDOW Facebook, you saw a recent signing of the Pheasants Forever Partnership Memorandum of Understanding. And basically it was a focused attempt at trying to bring together partners listed on this page to affect, again, work and efforts towards sagebrush conservation. Most likely it'll be focused in some efforts out towards Ely and working with Pinyon Juniper, again, looking at where we can be most efficient with the addition of maybe a possible position and letting them run the contract process and taking that outside of BLM's system, because there's realized cost savings, but there's also efficiencies in allowing those guys to go clear projects, and this individual can be, you know, managing the contract. So next slide. Sage West, this is kind of a newer thing. It's a collaboration of about 100 different organizations, 320 participants. It's, as highlighted there, a network focused on improving networking and advancing communications around the efforts that are occurring in sagebrush communities. It doesn't address policies. The partners aren't there to worry about the policy or advocacy. It's more about trying to tell the story and trying to get people to acknowledge through social programs, social media, you know, the efforts that are occurring and the value of these lands. Next slide.
Excuse me, Alan, if I could just give a little background on the Sage West, and this is really what I was thinking when the question came up in Las Vegas. What are we doing? Is anybody doing anything? What can we do? And Sage West came out of a post-listing discussion when Secretary of Interior in 2015 said the sage grouse was not warranted for listing federal protection under the Endangered Species Act. The Fish and Wildlife Service and Audubon were a little afraid that everybody was going to say, our job's done here and go home. And they really wanted to maintain some of that energy and capitalize on the energy and attention on the sagebrush ecosystem. And they reached out and contacted the state wildlife agencies and federal partners in the 11 sage grouse states and said, how can we best help you? And they heard overwhelmingly from everybody, we need communications capacity, we need outreach capacity, we need to message the importance of this ecosystem upon which 350 plus species depend. So we had a meeting in Salt Lake City, 2-day meeting, and brought decision makers, people in positions of authority that could make decisions and direct resources, and also all the outreach and networking, outreach education staff from the various agencies. And from that, Sage West was created and formed. And as Alan indicates, there's 328 participants representing over 100 different organizations. So rather than do the 1,000 random acts of education, the idea was to synergize the capacity within the agencies in a way that you could develop one big messaging toolbox that people could add to it, take from it, and prevent the redundancies, in 11 different states. And so this is a new campaign. It's a new effort. Just got it off the ground. I think maybe it's been 2 years, but it's relatively new. Still generating momentum and exposure and bringing more people in. But this is a West-wide campaign geared specifically to elevate the knowledge, the awareness, and the importance of the sagebrush ecosystem by those in all 11 sage grouse states, all the sage states in the West. There's actually discussions in this group about how we approach fires and firefighting, and we have some of those agencies present as well. So this was really what I was thinking with that question, and then certainly all these other efforts go hand in hand. So thanks, Alan.
You bet. And so next slide, well, that works right there. This shows you why Tony knows so much about it, because he's on the leadership team, over Sage West. And so, but if you look at this as much like he said, is you got Audubon, Intermountain West Joint Venture, NRCS, you got the folks that are doing it and come with a lot of really good communication specialists. Beth McKenna is also now out of our Conservation Education Department. She's also involved in Sage West and is working with them to take advantage on these communication capacity and abilities. Next slide. So one of the things, I don't know if many of you may have seen it, but if Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, you would see these people with the Sage campaign, and it's all about trying to, demonstrate how sagebrush communities are relevant to, different individuals from different walks of life. Also within that, next slide, there was a people with a sage, like Tony was talking about the fire and invasives. So it was about trying to capture the scientists, the teachers, the ranchers, to try to talk about what's going on in their world and how fire and invasive cycles are having impact on them. Next slide. Here's a simple screenshot off of that page. And so they've got some of the restoration guys on the left-hand side there that are, it's an article about why it's ugly for a reason, and it's got to do with, herbicide and chemical fallowing of lands for wildfire rehab, and then, the collaborative spirit of trying to do fire rehab, and then a teacher and some localized stuff out of the Great Basin. So it's not only, trying to inform people and make it relevant to them from their different walks of life, but it's also being used for an exchange of information. And I think they did 15 different media pieces just off of this fire and invasives. Next slide. Going into the future, these are what they're saying are coming. Healthy sagebrush equals healthy communities. LEED's going to be the Conservancy of the Rockies with IWJV. Swipe right for sagebrush, a dating app-inspired story featuring lesser-known sagebrush wildlife on social media, telling stories about Native American connections to sagebrush country, migration corridors, increasing awareness and storytelling. There was another page of this, but I just grabbed it as a simple demonstration of the things that are coming. But if you look at the quality of the images that these guys are doing, it's much beyond what many of the individual members can do by themselves. Really high quality, really well thought out media campaigns and social campaigns. Next slide. And with that, hopefully that gives you an overview of not only, what the department, what the commission is, committed towards sagebrush communities in the past, but the social awareness efforts that are, trying to tell that story. With that, I'll take any questions.
Questions? Commissioner East?
Thank you, Alan. That was great. Is there a way to evaluate and monitor any change in behavior or change in perception with the social media campaign? Is there any kind of an analysis or evaluation?
Boy, you're talking to a fire rehab guy and a biologist. Luckily, Bassie's back there, and he is a media guy, and I know
Yeah,
that
I'm
they
just-
talk about all the little widgets that they do and the ways that they can capture that. Tony might have some.
There's some testing on the front end of messaging.
Okay.
And there's some national conservation outreach strategies, and there are some individuals who are experts in those fields and human dimensions, and they're testing various slogans with, test groups on the front end. As far as the back end goes, at the end of the day, are people going to go out and light are the firefighters going to light huge backburns through critical sagebrush or not? And so, I think it is really difficult to measure those kinds of gradual changes in behavior. One of the ways that it's just being measured right now is through social media metrics. Visits, likes, hits, and certainly if any of you want to get on the Sage West listserv, there's a possibility to do that, no problem. You can add your name to the 328 people that are there right now representing 100 different organizations or agencies and get those regular kind of updates and directed to that social media and share it through your channels. But it's really difficult to measure other than exposure. You can measure the hits, the likes, the looks, but to see if it manifests itself in changes in on-the-ground firefighting tactics, I don't know.
Yeah, I meant more on the social side, how you're monitoring or evaluating the use, the likes, the
Yeah.
algorithms, those kinds of things.
Yeah, and Audubon has dedicated staff to this effort. The Audubon in Wyoming has dedicated staff to this effort, and it's a standing update in the Sagebrush Executive Oversight Committee of the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, and so they're continuing to expose more and more people to it and share those metrics in terms of hits and likes and visits and et cetera from social media.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Cheney, in terms of like the fires, the two that we had, the two really large ones, the Martin, is it one the Martin, and the other one was South Sugarloaf or some.
Yep.
Anyways, in regard to those, what are the limiting factors? Is it money? Is it manpower? Or do you have everything you need? Is it just the amount of time that's lost to rehabilitate the landscape? I mean, what is it that's the hardest hurdle to overcome for somebody who's trying to rehabilitate that much land?
Yeah, it's resources, it's people, it's equipment. When you have a fire such as that, and you have a fire year such as this, 1 million acres in the state of Nevada, plus a lot of other states, you saw the news. A lot of other states are burning as well, and so what you see is competition for resource. And that the first piece and the reason that you saw on that slide is we were on the ball to be very early in the seed buy process because seed becomes very scarce in big fire years like this. There was another one back in 2006, and that was the type of year we couldn't get most of the seeds. You were just getting a small assortment of seeds due to the competition. And so competition in trying to get the resources as far as seed, trying to get resources as far as equipment to actually rehab those areas. That's the biggest thing. One of the benefits of chemically fallowing does extend those timelines, but it comes with the background of, okay, now you've invested in fallowing, now you got to follow up the next year in seeding. And if you have 2 big fire years like we've just had, it kind of increases that demand on your limited resources of being able to try to, play that game. But if you go from a big fire year to a lesser fire year, it works out great, because then the next year you've got a break and you can go take care of those things that you've chemically fallowed. But it is literally, it's about people, it's about resources, it's about funds. Federal government, BLM, there were a lot of proposals there to hope, they submit fire rehab plans, and a lot of those had some pretty big projections, and not all of them were fully funded. And so that becomes, when they're not fully funded, then that comes back to the department and trying to make up those differences and trying to find opportunities to cover those priority habitats that may not get effort from federal funds. Did that answer your question, Commissioner Hobbs?
Commissioner McNinch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So kind of talking about the, getting the word around and stuff. And I can tell you that here locally, the local Audubon group is, there was a time where you'd engage in building birdhouses and, maybe activities like that, kind of the, something that you can interact with the kids and public maybe a little bit. But I know recently here that they've taken more of a role in, actually they're going out and doing a sagebrush planting some sagebrush in a burn area right now, here in the next week or two, if they're not doing it today. And I think the point is that message is filtering down in really small areas, but not insignificant areas. And I think that's what it's going to take ultimately is, the people that are involved with these initiatives and stuff, they are getting the message, and they're doing what they can, and that's where that foundation gets big, and pretty soon these things swell. So, I appreciate the work that you guys are doing to bring attention to it, and there was a lot of excitement in getting out there and making a difference, and small but not insignificant, and I think that's what it's going to take, and I think it's happening. It's just how do you handle a 700,000 acre patch of territory, so.
Oh, thank you, Commissioner McNinch. And, the one thing, we're biologists, we're fire rehab guys. A lot of them really, they got into that line of work because they like being in the field. They don't like to worry about talking to people. They don't like telling their story. And, these efforts such as Sage West, People of the Sage, working with Con Ed folks, it really helps. I mean, when we can put that message out there, and a lot of us don't know the social media programs, and so it helps so much, and there's no doubt we're seeing a shift in trend. It's getting more acknowledgement. You see a lot more organizations going towards it, and it's getting more press, so thank you.
I guess I appreciate this because I think this was something that I wanted to hear about. And I just constantly feel like the biggest challenge is that the people in this room know what's at stake. But I don't think the people of Nevada knows what's at stake because we have such an urbanized population. I mean, I don't know how many times I come in for a morning meeting or something in Reno, and people are like, you came in last night? And I'm like, no, I drove in this morning. Like, well, how long did that take you? I'm like, well, I'm only an hour and 10 minutes away. I live in Yerington, and Yerington's not far from Reno, and people don't know where Yerington is. And I feel like people on the news, if a fire threatens homes, it's news. If it burns up 500,000 acres of our state, and the news blib is one structure was lost, then people think, oh, no big deal. We dodged a bullet. Only one structure was lost. And they don't understand what was lost, because the outreach needs to be told as to what's out there. And I'm always amazed at how many people just don't know what we have in Nevada in terms of wildlife, beauty, places you can go because it's public. And this type of outreach effort, and I think about it, there is no way the population would tolerate such a fire in certain locations. If it threatens Yosemite, you know, it's national news. If it was threatening Lake Tahoe, we wouldn't stand for it. But the perception is it's not threatening anything because it's out in those rural hills in the rural part of the state of Nevada, and that perception has to change. And I'm very pleased to hear that these efforts are underway. I guess my question is there anything this commission can do to help assist in delivering the message? Is that delivering the message to our legislature, our congressional delegation? What is it that we can do as a commission? I look at our mandate is about the protection and propagation and everything else of the state's wildlife. And it seems that we might be able to do more. I'm just not sure what it is. I know it's a very complicated problem, and everyone's going to talk about funding and competition for funding and that, but you know, I also hear there's a competition for firefighting resources. And because there's that competition, the bigger fires get the resources. So it's only once the fire reaches a certain level that all the resources are devoted, and by that time, often it's too late. So I guess, and I don't need the answer, I'm not expecting an answer now, is guidance from the department back to this commission. What can we do to help advance this message? Because I think it's in a message that we need to advance as much as anyone else. Because I just think it's sad. It's just year after year we hear about these fires, and it's almost like people just, not the people in this room. I don't suggest that at all. But how do we communicate it? And to whom do we communicate the message? And that would be something I would like to make a priority of this commission.
I want to say I agree with you, Chairman, on that issue, but I also believe deeply, having lived in two of the largest urban areas in the state of Nevada, that people will surprise you. They just don't know. If you put something like the $25 million bond on a ballot, you'd be surprised at how many people will stop and mark yes, because they want to do something for wildlife, but they just don't know what to do. That's why I was thinking, like, can we have a fund, something for fires? I mean, I feel like the public in general does understand that we are having more and more of these fires too. You do hear that even in urban areas. And I think if there was a way that they could do something to provide a rainy day fund for the state, I would be surprised if they didn't elect to do so.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, why don't we go ahead and take a break until now, and then we can finish the rest of the agenda items after the break. It's 10 to 11. Let's meet back here at 5 after.
to unmute.
Kathy, do you have any public there?
Yes, Jan.
Our seats, we could get started again. Nebraska's up. Sorry about that. Everybody ready? All right, we'll move on to agenda item number 16, Commission General Regulation for possible action, public comment allowed. Commission General Regulation 480, shotgun gauges legal for turkey hunting, LCB file number R194-18. Game Warden Captain Mike Maynard, for possible action, public comment allowed. The commission will consider adopting a regulation relating to amending Chapter 503 of the Nevada Administrative Code. This regulation would remove the prohibition against using a shotgun smaller than 20 gauge to hunt wild turkey. It would also clean up unnecessary language regarding shot size used on a wildlife management area. The commission held a workshop on September 21st, 2018, and the commission directed the department to reverse the changes on page 1, keeping the prohibition against using a shotgun smaller than a 20 gauge and retaining the cleanup language on page 2 relating to shot size used on a wildlife management area. Captain Maynard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. That pretty much says it all. It's going to be pretty brief. Uh, I'm sure everyone is familiar with the history. This was initially in response to a petition from a representative of Federal Ammunition. Some changes were contemplated after the process had occurred. It was decided to go back to something resembling the original language of the regulation with some verbiage cleanup. The most significant changes in summary are going to be removal of the phrase number in front of the word 10 gauge, words 10 gauge. So shotgun, which is no larger than a number 10 gauge, would be changed to shotgun, which is no larger than or than 10 gauge. And then the language nor smaller than a 20 gauge would be added back in. The next significant change was simply a language cleanup. There's redundant language in part 2. And you would delete the language non-toxic shot and not larger than a standard size T, and just submit or insert the word non-toxic in there. That's it. I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? And just as a reminder, I think that Cap Maynard did this quite well. We're maintaining the existing gauge limitations of 10 and 20 and cleaning up the language that just makes it clear that the wildlife management areas, the shot has to be non-toxic, and removing some redundant language. Any further questions? Seeing none, I'll take it out for public comment. First, starting in Las Vegas. Any public comment in Las Vegas?
No comment in Las Vegas. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any public comment in Reno? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission. Commissioner McNinch.
Unless anybody has any comment, I'll make a motion to accept Commission General Regulation 480 shotgun gauges legal for turkey hunting, LCB file number R194-18 as presented.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Commissioner McNinch to adopt the regulation as presented with a second from Vice Chairman Valentine. Any further comments or questions? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 9-0. Thank you, Captain Maynard. Move on to Commission Regulation, or Agenda Item 17, Commission Regulations for Possible Adoption, Public Comment Allowed. Agenda Item 17A, Commission Regulation 19-01, Taking of Raptors for Falconry for 2019-2020. Wildlife Diversity Administrator Jennifer Newmark for possible action. The Commission will consider and may take action to approve the 2019-2020 season dates, species, quotas, limits, closed areas, application procedures, and deadlines, and take of raptors for falconry. Ms. Newmark.
Good morning, Jennifer Newmark, Wildlife Diversity Division Administrator for Department of Wildlife. Commission Regulation 1901 would set our limits and seasons for raptors taken for falconry for the 2019-2020 season. The department is proposing no changes from our prior year's regulations. We continue to recommend a limit of 1 raptor per permit of not more than any of 1 species. And the exception to that would be under the authority of the second capture permit, a person may take another raptor of the same species to replace a bird that was captured in that same year that was either lost or died. Species open to falconry statewide continue to be Cooper's hawk, sharp-shinned hawk, prairie falcon, merlin, American kestrel, red-tailed hawk, ferruginous hawk, and great horned owl. Northern goshawks are open statewide except for in Elko County, which is closed north of I-80 in these recommendations. We recommend that our seasons remain the same, with the IS season from March 1st through August 31st of each year, and the passage season from January 1 through December 31 of each year. And then further, the department is recommending the continued take restriction of 1 IS to be left in every nest from which raptors are captured, and no IS to be removed prior to 10 days of age. Finally, within the nest area, we recommend that that area may not be entered when young are 28 days or more of age. And this is to help prevent forced fledglings of those young before they're really ready to go. With that, I stand for any questions.
Any questions for Ms. Newmark? Seeing none, we'll take it out to public comment, starting in Las Vegas.
No public comment, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any public comment in Reno? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission. Commissioner McNinch?
Okay, I'll make a motion to approve Commission Regulation 19-01, taking of raptors for falconry for 2019 through 2020 as presented.
Okay, I have a motion by Commissioner McNinch and a second by Commissioner Hubbs to approve Commission Regulation 19-01 as presented. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 9-0. We are rolling right through this agenda today. Move on to item 17B, Commission Regulation 19-02, non-commercial collection of reptiles and amphibians for 2019-2020. Wildlife Diversity Administrator Jennifer Newmark for possible action. The commission will consider may take action to approve 2019-2020 season and limits for non-commercial hobby collecting of live, unprotected reptiles and amphibians. Ms. Newmark.
Jennifer Newmark, Administrator for Wildlife Diversity Division of Nevada Department of Wildlife. For the 2019-2020 season, the department is recommending the same limits that we've had in previous years. We recommend that the field collection season will remain from January 1st through December 31st of each year. And we're recommending the same bag and possession limits for each of the species that are listed within the regulation, and there's quite a few of them, so I won't go through each individual species. And then I would just like to note for the record that species that are not specifically listed within the regulation are recommended to remain closed to any collection. And with that, I'll answer any questions.
Any questions for Ms. Newmark? Seeing none, any public comment in Las Vegas?
No comment in Las Vegas, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Public comment in Reno? Mr. Dixon, come on up.
For the record, Paul Dixon, Clark County. The only reason I come up to make public comment is that 6 members of my cab, I had 2 dissenting opinions, and I felt even though we supported what was here, I had 2 members of my cab that were very vocal. And I will state for the record, Tony, that your sheep biologist, Pat Cummins, actually defended the reptile regulation down there. He talked with Jason before he came. And I just wanted to put on the record the 2 dissenting opinions for these guys because they asked me to do that. The first one is that the fact that we have a regulation for non-commercial or hobbyist collection when we don't have a permit and we really don't monitor it in any meaningful way. They think it's in their words, a stupid regulation. We shouldn't even be talking about it unless we're actually gonna permit and monitor what people do in non-commercial collecting. Why are we even discussing it at a Wildlife Commission meeting, is their opinion. That's the first comment that was made. Second one is that they feel that we're way underestimating the non-commercial collection of reptiles. When you look at a population in Vegas of a couple million people, look at school-age kids, the number of kids in school, assuming there's a certain percentage of kids that collect, that appears to be, with the number of non-commercial collecting you could do, could be more reptiles than were being collected commercially. And they believe, again, that's an underestimate. Pat came to the defense of the department claiming that when they've done surveys at schools, it's clear that a very small, if any, percentage of kids collect reptiles anywhere at schools. So he believes that non-commercial collecting is a very minor thing. But I wanted to get that on the record because both those people asked me to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Any other public comment in Reno? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner
So
McNeil.
I'll ask a quick question, Jen. It sounds like maybe those concerns were addressed down there. Is there any concern with the non-commercial collection of reptiles?
For the record, Jennifer Newmark, Wildlife Diversity Administrator. I don't believe that there is, and when you look at national surveys that have been conducted over the years, there's something about 4% of all households have reptiles within that they keep as pets, and approximately half of those are bought in pet shops, and then another maybe 25% are acquired either through friends giving it to them or through a family member. And so really it's only about 15% of reptiles that are kept in captivity that are estimated to be caught wildly. So I don't see the concern there. And I think that it's an opportunity for our young people to interact with wildlife, and they're collecting species that are pretty common in urban areas, species more like, western fence lizards, and that are more common and generalists in nature. So no concern.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. I considering the steps that this commission's made in the last year and a half to address some of the concerns with the commercial side, I feel real comfortable moving forward with it myself. I think most of us probably will, but that was a huge step, recognizing the potential impacts, and I do think that it's a real positive place for people to get involved with wildlife and have a general understanding, and having some limits in place, I think also sends a strong message that it's not just a free-for-all. That there's, that we have to recognize the limitations, and, I think that it's, I'm comfortable with it. I'm ready to make a motion if nobody else has anything.
Does anyone have any other comments? Commissioner Hubbs?
Right, I'm assuming that the reptiles that are removed from the list, or you're stating that there are some that aren't on the list, are ones that aren't general in nature and may have some type of conservation issue, or, conservation at issue with them, or they may be, I don't know, struggling in terms of population numbers. So I'm assuming you've taken that all into consideration.
That is correct.
Any additional questions or comments?
Okay, with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve Commission Regulation 19-02, non-commercial collection of reptiles and amphibians for 2019-2020 as presented.
I have a motion by Commissioner McNinch and a second by Commissioner East to approve Commission Regulation 19-02 for the non-commercial collection of reptiles. Any further comments or questions, discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 9-0. Thank you, Ms. Newmark. We will move on to agenda item number 18, 2019 legislative session. Chairman Johnston for possible action. The commission will consider legislative platforms and proposal. The commission may vote to adopt legislative platforms and take action with respect to legislative proposals. I know, and I don't know, Secretary Walsley, if you're prepared to discuss kind of some of the legislation that's being tracked by the department so far, or at least BDRs. If not, I can move forward with the agenda item as to why I requested it.
Outside of the department, BDRs, wildlife BDRs beyond the department, as far as being able to discuss their merits or provide the commission information to determine whether you want to take a stance on an issue, or department BDR?
Let's start with the department BDRs first, and to the extent they're related to the commission's work.
Yeah, I think all that information is at this point public. I think the way we've characterized our approach to this upcoming legislative session is probably one of more of a defensive posture than an offensive, where last session we had a major license simplification effort, This time, our BDRs are housekeeping in nature, clarification. I think there's a addition of moose to one or a statute that exists in regulations. So they're cleanup in that they're trying to address discrepancies between regulations and statutes. In some instances, as is with the moose, it's a species that is expanding, is new to Nevada and expanding on its own. Want to make sure that there's consistency there. There was another clarification that provided the department specific authority to remove animals for the express purpose of public safety, where public safety isn't specifically called out. It mainly, the statute as it currently exists mainly speaks to our authorities to manage wildlife, in the broad sense of the benefit of the species and citizens of the state. I think law enforcement was concerned, given the increase that we're talking about in here with some aggressive coyotes that have been fed, mountain lions, bears, other things, as we see these interactions increase, that authority be specifically called out and granted to law enforcement for the express purpose of public safety removals. I don't recall some of the other specific details on some of those cleanup, but we would be happy to provide a detailed update and report on that, not only the agency ones, but other bills that we're aware of, and the extent to which we know of what they contain. We can have that discussion in January if you want.
Yeah, and I guess that dovetails into why I wanted to have this on the agenda, is in prior legislative years, we've kind of started, in my opinion, later in the game rather than earlier. And given the open meeting law requirements and our ability to set either a legislative committee meeting or a commission meeting, it's very hard. I was hoping to try to start the discussion now with the hopes that at a minimum we think about a legislative committee meeting in January to get an update from the department. One of the issues that I had potentially going into the legislative session, given public input in that, would be transfer of tags under certain circumstances. Would that require a statutory change? We'll hopefully have the answer to that by January. I also did receive a call from Larry Johnson about some legislative issues that would be part of the coalition going into the legislative session. And one of them, it dovetails into the presentation yesterday about more general fund reimbursement or general fund allocation or appropriation to the department for the management of urban wildlife conflict. I know that was on their agenda. They also talked about return or transfer of big game tags for certain circumstances. And one thing that's come up in the past at this commission is can there be room to spend down some of the Heritage Fund principal for certain things? We've talked about that at this commission meeting. And, we talked about the fires and the habitat, and there's points in time where you look at the balance and there's a lot of principle. Are there circumstances in which that principle could be expended on wildlife projects, habitat restoration, and things of that nature? I think there's also a concern, and it may be a concern that as big pots of money continue to grow, others may seek to grab it. And I think there is some concerns in the community that as the heritage funds continue to grow, would that ever be susceptible to being taken for other purposes than what they were originally intended? Because it's a substantial amount. And so those were some of the things that I had been alerted to, things that have been the topic of discussion at this commission before, that I just wanted to raise now so that we could start looking at those in connection with the commission meeting in January. Obviously, we don't know what the legislature is going to look like until Tuesday, nor the outcome of other races that are up for grabs come Tuesday. So that's what I wanted to kind of do today, was start the discussion. I don't know if people have other comments or. Commissioner McNinch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll go back to the, you know, the challenges I know the department's facing with their, you know, the trapping, especially of bears for public safety purposes, and the increase in tampering and messing with the department's ability to follow through on, you know, on their charge to protect, to be protective. And, you know, I know that you know, there might be disagreement, but the bottom line is the department has a responsibility there. And I think the consequences need to be more severe for people as an incentive to encourage voluntary compliance, you know, getting in and preventing flattening tires and making it difficult for the agency to do their job is it's just not acceptable. I think we could build a platform around that particular issue. Possibly looking into how we can strengthen existing laws or advancing the thought of people that are providing direct threats to people participating in a lawful activity. I know there's stuff in there already, but maybe specifying it to things that are relevant to the department or the commission. I think that that's something. And the other item that I would like to with the Recovering America's Wildlife Act, you know, when and how that progresses, I think starting a conversation. We've already had one a long time ago with the legislature on finding a way to get that funding that kicks that money into gear. You know, that could be anywhere from $4, $5, $6 million a year to access a pretty good chunk of money. And I think that having those conversations with the legislature is appropriate, whether it's timely or not. I mean, it'd be a couple years before we had another opportunity to do it, and things might have changed dramatically with that act. So having something in place, it would be beautiful to have something in place, you know, that if there's money on the table, that the state would find a way to access it. That's a big lift and a big ask, but if we're going to take advantage of that opportunity, we're going to have to do something about it. So those are some thoughts that I had.
Thank you. Commissioner Olmberg.
Yeah, I'm not too sure where this stands. We discussed this a couple years ago about expanding the language for the handicap. We were talking about the permit for game retrieval after they've wounded it, to expand that language to include anybody with a handicap instead of, I think the language was very specific to somebody was a double amputee, and we had discussions about expanding that out to anybody with a medical. Yep.
Any other items? This is an action item, so I will take it out to public comment and start in Las Vegas.
Go ahead, Jana. Mr. Chair, Commissioners, Jana Wright for the record. I would just like for you to have on your radar about the $3 fee. During the last legislative session, I think a bill passed, but the governor vetoed it, which was going to remove the 80% mandate and broaden the use of the $3 fee to some non-lethal efforts to manage wildlife. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Wright. Any other public comment in Las Vegas?
Further comment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Public comment in Reno. Mr. Belding, come on down.
Al Belding, speaking for myself, I like the proactive approach that you're taking, Chairman Johnston, and in the legislature, the past legislature, it became very, I they are after that money. And I was in the legislature a lot last year, and there was a couple legislators that mentioned where a better place for that money to go on the heritage account. We've been concerned about this for years. We've had this discussion for many years, and I would like to see that pot taken down to a very minimum, and those monies be used. I think we're getting 75% now. I'd like to see that taken about 95% of this year's take, and it is extremely important to get that pot taken down to where they don't want to mess with it. But last year there was two legislators in particular that spoke of some real high interest to put that money in different places. And it is alarming to see that happen at that legislature, but I appreciate this proactiveness. Thank you.
Thank you, Mel. Mr. Dixon?
For the record, Paul Dixon speaking on behalf of myself. I've been doing this now for almost 11 years, and there was discussions when Chairman Lent was in here, and Darryl Capurro was our representative going to the legislature, about trying to get the heritage funds opened up and doing things. And at the time, Brian Stockton, our AG, reassured the commission that based on the language, the way that was written and other things, that it was virtually impossible. Nothing is impossible, but virtually impossible. In other words, very low probability that anybody could ever make the thing where they could take the money because of the way that it was set up, the account was set up and done things. And I think before we talk about this, it's a great thing to worry about, but I think we need to get an AG opinion that says somebody could actually go in and do something with the funds the way that that account was set up and how it was organized. And we were assured by Brian Stockton at the time that that wasn't possible. And if something has changed to this point in time, I would like the AG's opinion for you guys to have that, to say that that's changed and it's something that we need to go look at. We're getting into a point in time where interest rates are going up, gentlemen, and that balance is going to pay huge dividends. We've just went through the lowest interest rates over the last 8 years or 10 years, and we're going to start making tons of money in interest rates on that balance. Now, taking it down to some finite number, I don't care what it is, but taking it down as low as possible, when we can make the kind of money we can make an interest on that, if it's a safe balance, I think would be a wise financial decision. But I remember Stockton telling the commission at that time that it was safe, and there was an AG opinion that Brian had on that. And I don't know if that still exists or whatever, but that's my memory of that. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. Any other public comment in Reno? Seeing none, I'll close public comment and bring it back to the commission. I'm not sure if there's any particular action that needs to be taken now, but perhaps we could have a legislative committee meeting in January in connection with the commission meeting and start talking about some of these items. I don't know what the flavor of the commission's going to be, but I would expect some proposed changes to the predator fee, where we might stand on that issue. I know one of the things I've expressed in the past is that the program keeps changing, and we're in the midst, and we've wanted to work at least through a couple cycles with the programs in place to see the results. And if all that starts changing every 2 years in the legislature, I'm not so certain we're advancing the ball. But I understand the comments being made with respect to the heritage account as well on both sides. I know it is a sensitive topic. I think there are points and times, though, where we think, wow, we have this project, or we have this many hundreds of thousands of acres that could be burned. Could we just push a little more money? And under the law, we can't. So that I think it will be as a good discussion today, start getting feedback from the public on these issues. And unless someone wants to make a motion or any particular action that needs to be taken, I think we just let it rest and we'll get going on the legislative committee come January. I see a lot of people nodding their heads, so with that, we'll close agenda item 18 and move on to agenda item 19. Future commission meetings and commission committee assignments. Secretary Tony Wasley and Chairman Johnston for possible action. The next commission meeting is scheduled for January 25th and 26th, 2019 in Reno, and the commission will review and discuss potential items for that meeting. The commission may change the time and meeting location at this time. The chairman may designate and adjust committee assignments and add or dissolve committees as necessary at this time. Any anticipated committee meetings that may occur prior to the next commission meeting may be discussed. So if I may, Secretary Wasley, obviously we just talked about a legislative committee, but I went through and I'm just gonna talk about committee assignments since we have new commissioners and so this is what I've come up with, and I don't even know if some of these committees are still active. But with respect to the Administrative Procedures, Regulations, and Policy Committee, I have that continuing to be Commissioner McNinch is the chair, along with Commissioners Valentine, Hubbs, and new Commissioner Cavilla on that committee. The Duck Stamp Judging Committee, I don't know if that's going to be needed. Are we? We're not going to have the Duck Stamp Judging Committee, so I would dissolve that committee. The Elk Damage and Incentive Committee, I'm not so certain there's anything to do there, but I'm not prepared to dissolve it at this point in time. It may come back, but I will announce the formation of the new committee. So the Elk Damage and Incentive Committee would be Commissioner Keel, Commissioner Barnes is the chair, Commissioner Valentine, and Lincoln Cab member Corey Lytle. The Finance Committee, Public Representative Gil Yannick will chair that. Commissioner Johnston, I'll continue to serve on that one, and if Mr. Dixon is prepared to continue his service on that committee, I'm going to keep that committee as is. For the Legislative Committee, Commissioner East as the chair, along with myself and Commissioner Valentine and Public Representative Greg Smith. The Public Lands Committee, Commissioner Barnes is the chair, along with Commissioners Almberg. Commissioner McNinch, I put you on this committee if you're willing to serve, sure. Along with Commissioner Hubbs. And Clark County Cab member Paul Dixon. The State Predatory Animal and Rodent Committee, Commissioners Keel and Barnes. The Tag Allocation and Application Hunt Committee, that'll be chaired by Commissioner Valentine, Commissioner Barnes, and Cavilla, along with Joe Krim from Pershing County and Megan Brown. So the biggest change on that, if it's a big change, I'm stepping off of that committee. The Wayne E. Kirch Wildlife Conservation Award Committee, that'll be chaired by myself and along with Commissioner Valentine. The Wildlife Damage Management Committee, Commissioner Almberg will be the chair. Commissioners Cavilla, Barnes, and Hubbs, and Humboldt Cab member Tom Casanelli. And I'm stepping down off of that committee as well. I'm not trying to avoid work. I'll just say that I think with new commissioners coming on board, it's important to bring newer commissioners onto certain committees so they understand what those committees do and go through the cycle a couple times. Wildlife Heritage Committee, Commissioner Valentine, Vice Chairman Valentine will chair that committee. I will serve on that committee along with Commissioner Almberg and Cavilla. Additional members are Mineral Cab member Glenn Bunch and Pershing Cab member Joe Krim. The Wildlife Scholarship Recipient Selection Committee, I will chair that committee with the alternate commissioner of Commissioner East. And going through this, I realized how much Grant did if you went through the committee meetings. I need to make that note because I was going through his committee assignments, and Grant really took on the laboring oar of a lot of things, and I don't know if everyone appreciated how much he did in the committee. And with that, the new committee will be the Landowner Compensation Tag Committee. That results from our prior. I will chair that committee. The additional members will be Commissioner Keel, Barnes, and Valentine. Lincoln Cab member Corey Lytle will also be on that committee. And the public representatives of that committee will be Larry Johnson and Bevan Lister. I have not reached out to Mr. Lister yet. I suspect he will be willing to serve. If not, I'm going to ask him and Doug Busselman of Farm Bureau to identify potential alternatives. But based upon prior meetings, I believe he would be prepared to do that. So those, Secretary Wosley, are the committee assignments that I came up with, and I have it in writing in red line from what I took offline, which was Chairman Wallace's committee assignments, so I can provide that to the department.
Thank you.
Based on that, I guess one chairman of the Legislative Committee, Commissioner East, will be setting a legislative committee meeting in connection with the January commission meeting. Any other committee meetings that we can anticipate?
Were you anticipating a TAC meeting?
I'm no longer the chair nor a member, so that I leave that up to you.
Well, based on...
My suggestion would be yes, but that's ex officio.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I will be setting up a TAC meeting for the January meeting.
Any other committee meetings that we can anticipate? Commissioner Barnes.
Yeah, I'll possibly consider it public lands. It's been a while since I think that committee's met, and with the issue of wild horses and some of the stuff that Alan presented, I think it's worth getting a committee together to at least get some discussion going and maybe set a direction for that committee. So I'll be in contact with you and Director Warsley, see if time will allow at the January meeting. But we'll look at considering something like that.
And I don't know if it might be too ambitious to set it in January, but I want to get the Landowner Compensation Tag Committee going. So we may try to do something in January as well on that. So with that, I'll go to Secretary Wosley for the other portion of this agenda item.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in addition to those committee meetings, the primary order of business at this meeting is typically the commission regulations for big game seasons, including black bear seasons, mountain lion quotas, the heritage tag seasons and quotas, dream tag seasons and quotas, the partnership and wildlife, PIW seasons and quotas, silver state tag seasons and quotas, big game application deadline, and big game tag eligibility. There are 2 CGRs. We will be having an additional workshop on CGR 482 on the public and sellable list regulation. We'll also have a workshop on CGR 483, which is dealing with SWAN permits. It's similar in one aspect to the discussion around the sellable list. The CGR is providing the discretion. That authority already exists, but historically that's been you have to go to the office and get that tag. We're trying to modernize that, take advantage of that new system, and let the commission determine the means by which people can obtain those and how those will be issued. We will hear a presentation of the draft predation management plan. We'll have a wildlife heritage account report, and then reports from the various committees that we've heard are meeting, TAC, Ledge Committee. We'll also have a report from the WAFWA Midwinter Conference. I have a couple items that I would ask for direction from the commission. One is we have several items that we can bring before the commission at the time that works for the commission. One is the American Wildlife Values Survey. We just recently received the updated copy of the American Wildlife Values Survey. By that time, I suspect we'll have the Nevada-specific report as well. We'd be happy to present an overview of that at whatever time the commission desires. I'd also ask for your thoughts, guidance, and input relative to department project updates. If there are some items that you've heard here through the department activity report that you'd like to hear more about, or things that you haven't that you would like to know more about, either provide us that direction now or reach out to me at any point between now and the development of that agenda, and we'll include those. We've also talked about conservation partner spotlight. We didn't have anything at this meeting, but we will be in the north. We had the meeting in Vegas. We heard from the fraternity and some of their history and priorities and accomplishments. So if there's a particular conservation partner that you'd like to hear from or have before you here, we can reach out, try to make that happen. Similarly, we've talked about the opportunity to present species spotlights. That could be accomplished either through a department project update or in addition to or in place of a conservation partner. We've also been given some direction to bring forward kind of the pros and cons of a combined season quota type framework, what the limitations may be there. So we will be prepared to present that at that meeting if desired. We also committed to providing a report, an update on the botulism events that occurred in northern Nevada this summer. We would be prepared to provide that update if the commission so desired. And then lastly on my list, Recovering America's Wildlife Act. It's something that there are new sponsors added weekly. There will be some key meetings post-election that'll determine the strategy going forward. And by the end of January, we should have some insights into what that strategy looks like, and we'd be happy to provide that update at that time if it's the commission's desire. If you want to see it moved out, that's fine too. So I know that's a whole lot of stuff, but I just want to throw all that out there and take direction from the commission as far as what you want to hear.
I hate to say all of it, but I think we need to move forward on these things. I know it may be 2 long days, but there's a lot of things that are going on. I would add to that on the agenda, we should have the recurring agenda item regarding the legislative session, so that we could have a report from the legislative committee and then potential possible action by the commission as a whole. I can think of a number of conservation partners from the north that could be a part of that meeting. Obviously, the ones that come to mind is NBU, Reno, Carson Valley Chucker Club. There's several. We hear a lot about NBU Reno and its funding efforts in connection with the department and its efforts, so that would be my suggestion. This is an action item or for possible action, so I will take it out to public comment. Any public comment in Las Vegas?
No public comment in Las Vegas. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any public comment in Reno? With that, we'll close agenda item number 19 and move on to agenda item number 20, public comment period. Persons wishing to speak are requested to complete a speaker's card and present it to the recording secretary. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes. No action can be taken by the commission at this time. Any item requiring commission action may be scheduled on a future commission agenda. Any public comment in Las Vegas?
No comment in Las Vegas. Thank you.
Any public comment in Reno? Seeing none, I just, as we approach November and the holidays, I want to wish everyone a very safe and happy holiday season. And I will say I want to express one thing I'll be thankful for on Thanksgiving is the opportunity I get to serve on this commission in a world of division and fighting and polarization. It is wonderful to sit through a 2-day meeting, commission motions passing 9-0, and the discussion always remaining civil and productive, and I'm very thankful that I get to serve with each and one of my fellow commissioners and along with the people from the department. So with that, I wish everyone a very happy holiday season, and we will see you in 2019.